Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. Thank you, George, for writing this one. It's Kazuo Taoka, the Japanese Godfather. You want to hear something embarrassing? I've never seen the movie The Godfather. 1, 2, or 3. I've heard they're excellent.
Are you serious?
It's just one of those things I just never got around to watching somehow. And people are like, yes, I mean, you've not seen any good movies. And I really should see it because I think I'd probably enjoy it. Although I did see Goodfellas and was kind of disappointed by Goodfellas as like a gangster movie that everyone holds up as like being excellent. Love the shit out of The Usual Suspects, which, also a gangster movie? Yeah, definitely. Would I like The Godfather? I don't know. Probably should watch it. Anyway, the format of the show here. George writes me a script, never read it before. Let's jump in. Kazuo Taoka wasn't born powerful. He earned it with his fists, his knives, and a willingness to do what other men couldn't stomach. Oh, solid first line, George, gotta say, and this is a big script. That's a good start. From his earliest days, he built himself a reputation, one broken nose at a time, until he caught the eye of the Yamaguchi-gumi syndicate, and he started his long, brutal climb to the top. By the time he was finished, he'd turned a regional gang of dockside thugs into Japan's largest criminal syndicate, spreading across the nation like a slow, bloody tide. I am excited, George. I know it's going to be very bloody and horrible and all of this. I'm sure he does some horrible shit, but like a good gangster story, I don't know, it kind of gets me going. He reshaped the underworld, courted politicians, bought the loyalty of celebrities, turned crime into commerce and bloodshed into just another business expense. By the end, he wasn't just running gangsters, he was running an empire. But behind the sharp suits and charity photo ops was still the same man who thought nothing of settling disputes with a blade. He never changed, he just learned how to wear a tie. This is the story of Kazuo Taoka, the godfather of Japan, the king of the underworld, and the man who bent an entire nation's shadows to his will. Okay, let's f***ing go. From orphan to street bear. Taoka, as I will call him for simplicity, was born all the way back on the 28th of March 1913 in a tiny little farming village in Tokushima Prefecture on Japan's rural Shikoku Islands. If you're picturing a future mob boss cradled in luxury, think again, because just like with seemingly every mobster story I cover, his family were dirt poor, specifically being tenant farmers who struggled to even just get by, and luxuries, well, forget about it. For them, a good day was one when no one went to bed hungry. He was also the youngest of 5 kids, having a brother and 3 sisters, and rather tragically, his father died before he was even born. To make matters for young Taoka even worse, his mother wasn't long for the world either, as bearing the burden of a family farm squarely on her shoulders was simply too much, and so she collapsed and passed away when he was only 6 years old, her body battered and broken from over half a decade's worth of non-stop back-breaking labor. That is how you get a chip on your shoulder. That is how you're like, fuck this, I'm gonna own this shit. And I know it's covered in blood, but I love it. Now orphans, young Taoka was taken in by his uncle, a man named Washiro Kawauchi, who lived in the port city of Kobe. Is that where the beef comes from? Oh, it is Japanese, right? Kobe beef, it must be. I do love a good Kobe beef burger. I love a good Kobe steak. It's just super expensive.
Shut up and take my money.
Hello everybody, just a quick break in the episode to tell you something that's been incredible for my mornings after a night out and a few too many beers. And that would be ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists with giant brains, allegedly, to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it is that byproduct, it's not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. And you know that's true because you could drink as much as you want before you go to bed and in the morning and you're still like, oh, why? Why am I like this? Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break that byproduct down. Just remember, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel best tomorrow. Enjoy drinks responsibly with friends and still wake up ready for work the next day. Click the link in the description to get 15% off your first order at checkout with free shipping. Plus, ZBiotics offers a 100% money-back guarantee. If you're not satisfied for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. And let's get back to the video. At a glance, this was a big upgrade in the life department for Taoka, as back then Kobe was a city on the up, being a port city that handled a not insignificant portion of the nascent Japanese empire's cargo, which naturally brought all manner of opportunities for self-enrichment along with it. Better still, Washiro had already secured himself such an opportunity with his 9-to-5, as he worked as a foreman at the Kanibo Shipping Company and brought home a tidy middle-class wage as a result. Glances, however, can be deceiving and rarely capture the full nuance of the matter, and this is wisdom that is vindicated by that stage of Taoka's life, as he himself described it as being objectively miserable. You see, and I'm putting all my recent cultural and language learning to the test here. Let me tell you folks, Taoka is not actually seen as a nephew at all, but rather a morariko, which roughly translates to given child. This term, in its 100-ish years ago context, was a very literal one and referred to a child that was begrudgingly forced upon someone else and was not wanted. Oh, well that's... the chip is growing. As a result, Taoka's aunt treated him coldly, feeding and clothing him, and that's about it. She was actually the kinder guardian too, if you could believe it, because Washiro, who was also a heavy drinker, would beat him regularly. It's not exactly what you'd call a nurturing environment for a young boy. Not having much choice in the matter, however, Taoka persevered. He didn't preserve anything. He wasn't out there like jarring pickles. And by age 12, he had finished elementary school and then went on to higher elementary. And please know, dear audience, that the word think is in bold and underlined in the script to emphasize my lack of certainty in the matter, that higher elementary schools were just an imperial era thing, and that the modern equivalent in Japan would be a lower secondary school, which Japanese students start in their 7th academic year, usually at the age of 12. It's so confusing how different countries do schooling differently. I'm constantly confused by, I'll read a script for an American. George is also British, so it would be easier if he gave, a British comparison for me there, but that's fine. But America is he's in, what's it called? Freshman? A high school Is a high school freshman a thing? It's lower high school. It's very confusing. I don't understand. Even in the UK, I went to a school where it was grade Form 1, Form 2, but then also other schools had Year 7, Year 8, which continued on from primary school, finishing in Year 6. And it was just it was very confusing. And then I live in Czech Republic, and it's the whole system's completely different again. And I'm what do all these things mean? Which are the good schools again? Back to the matter at hand, however, if you can believe it, given how he ended up, Taoka did actually try to go straight at this point, keeping his head down at school and being diligent in his studies. And he even eventually landed himself steady employment as a lathe operator's apprentice at the age of 14. It was a most noble effort, to be sure, but unfortunately, and perhaps unsurprisingly, Taoka had quite the temper on him, which had him constantly in bother with his supervisors. Unfortunately, while many of the books written on him mention this, specific examples are few and far between, with one notable exception, which they all discuss, and that was in 1929, when, after having been on the job for 2 years, he viciously assaulted one of the aforementioned supervisors with a broom after said supervisor exposed their umbrage with the pace of his sweeping. This naturally spelled the end of his gainful employment, with my sources being split on whether or not he stormed out of his own volition or was, potentially literally, thrown out of the door after having received a right and proper shoeing at the hands of the assaulted supervisor's pals. Yeah. The boss sounds like a but you're going to lose your job and probably going to catch a bit of a beating in the past if you do this. That's what he deserved. Come on. Either way, it makes no difference, and the next part of the story remains the same, with the now 16-year-old Taoka finding himself unwilling to go back and face his uncle with the shame of what he'd just done, and so he opted to simply not leave the docks at all, instead becoming a street wanderer who just, kind of hang about, doing whatever he had within his modest capabilities to stave off boredom and hunger alike. And it's here that fate intervenes and threw Taoka a butty so rich with the flavour of opportunity that it would change the course of his life forever. A butty's a British slang for a sandwich. You see, one night, after a length of time that none of the books bothered to tell me, but can't have been longer than a year because he was still 16, he bumped into an old classmate from his school days by the name of Hideo Yamaguchi. Now, to many of you, the family name Yamaguchi will have gone right over your head. Yeah, yes. But also Yamaguchi does sound familiar for some reason. But for a select minority of you, your ears pricked up. They did, but I don't know why, George. And you just took a double barrel's worth of foreshadowing shot straight into your ears because, yes, I'm referring to that Yamaguchi family, the one that founded the Yamaguchi-gumi, i.e. what is today Japan's largest Yakuza syndicate. just got real. Yeah, okay, that's probably why I know the name then, isn't it? Yamaguchi. And if you know the specifics of the family connection, Hideo just happened to be the younger brother of Noboru Yamaguchi, the Komicho, or boss of the whole organization. Alright, you've got an opportunity here. It's worth noting, however, that while the Yamaguchi are the big boys of the Japanese underworld today, back then in 1929 they really weren't, with them still just being a relatively small local gang based purely in Kobe, and mostly just having a hand in dockside labor disputes, as it were, and running gambling rackets. Makes sense that they weren't yet big time too, as they were only founded 14 years prior by Harukichi Yamaguchi, Noboru's father. Feeling bad for Taoka, and remembering him as a decent enough sort from school, Noboru offered to get him a bed in the Yamaguchi's gang quarters, or the Gonzo-baya to use its proper name. This term in context actually turned out to be a bit of a nightmare to translate in a way that did it true justice, so just think of it as a Yakuza hostel come flophouse and you get the idea. From there, he fell in with a group of local delinquents with whom he would find his first real hobby and passion in life, and that's fighting. So it became his new daily ritual, taking a job if available, usually as a night guard at naughty theatres, and to put a bit of brass in his pocket, and then spending his remaining time prowling the streets, picking fights with his fellow yobbos for sport. For Giga Chads and Chadheads in the audience who just happen to be enjoyers of the Yakuza game series, yes, I too am picturing it being exactly like what happens when you try to take Kiryu for a little stroll around the streets of Kamurochi. George, I've never even heard of the Yakuza game series. So I've got no idea what you're talking about, but I trust that a very small percentage of our organization. Get it together, Simon. Use your words. It's Monday morning. A very small segment of our audience, not organization. What are we, a gang? As for Taoka, however, he proved to be very good at his new pastime, to the point that he was soon making a name for himself. He wasn't exactly a Queensberry rules type of scrapper either. His signature move, pinning his opponents down, getting his thumbs right into their eyes and having a good old rummage about until the tips of his thumbs started feeling all warm and gooey. No fucking way. That's like... Wait, what? That's not fighting. That's like GBH. Grievous bodily harm. This little move was also what earned him his first underworld nickname, Kuma, meaning bear. Why? Well, apparently it was because seeing him go to town on someone's eyes bore an uncanny resemblance to what happens when a bear decides that it fancies a bit of oblivious passing hike of a dinner. A lovely image, isn't it? The Bear's Rise. Taoka's trials and tribulations through the wonderful world of eye gouging would also earn him the attention of some much, much bigger fish, with the most notable of the lot being quite handily, given his new living arrangements, it has to be said, the leadership of the Yamaguchi, among which he raised many an eyebrow as a result of the so-called Minato-za theatre incident in 1930. Okay then, here's what went down. The Yamaguchi provided muscle, only as general security mind, for a local playhouse called the Minato-za. One day, when Taoka and some of his pals were working the theatre's gate, the theatre owner insulted them, calling them chimpira, basically low-ranking Yakuza. Wait, that's exactly what they are. You're like, hey, low-ranking Yakuza, and he'll be like, yeah, dude, that's me. I'm 21. Like, what do you want? I'm working my way up the ranks. But with a specific connotation that implied being low-class, rude, and lacking in emotional intelligence. Well, okay, there we go. So it's like a proper... It's not like like, hey, Jobs buddy. It's like... Hey, Jobs buddy, and you're a Jobs buddy because you're a piece of low-class peasant. Taoka, upon hearing that, decided to prove his naysayer right by stewing on the matter for a few minutes before next storming into the theatre without even bothering to take his shoes off, shock horror in 1930s Japan, and then rush the stage where he proceeded to royally kick off. And I do mean royally too, as he didn't just stand and rave, but instead started assaulting anyone and everything that he could get his hands on. Actors, stagehands, instruments, props, anything in arm's reach got a battering. Supposedly too, though not all of my sources say this explicitly, even a good eye gouging or two was dished out. If you get your eyes gouged like that, are you blind? I feel like you would be. Like, if it's all warm and squishy, your eyes are kind of fucked. Oh, I don't like thinking about it's just... I don't know, eyes, man. Oh. This, as you would imagine, led to Taoka's first meeting with the head of the Yamaguchi, which was then still Noboru. It had been while on the job for him that he had lost it after all, and to say his doing so left Noboru looking like just a bit of a tit would be quite the understatement. When met by Noboru's blind fury, however... George, right, he's got a typo, blind furry. Taoka's response proved surprising, as there was no kickoff, no standing his ground, and no trying to justify his actions. Nothing like that at all. Instead, he sat there, kneeling, slammed his forehead into the ground, and shoved humble pie down his throat as if his life depended on it, which in fairness to him, it very likely did. This lessened Noboru's rage to no end, and as Taoka's groveling went on, saying things like he had nowhere to go, that he simply couldn't afford to get kicked out of the flophouse that the Yamaguchi had ever so kindly given him space in, Noboru couldn't help but wonder if he might just happen to have a little diamond in the rough sat in front of him. Channel and focus that rage, nurture the humility now pouring out of him, and who knows what the young lad could be capable of. Instead of punishing Taoka severely then, Noboru instead gave him a chance and put him under the charge of his brother-in-law, and also one of his most senior subordinates, Matsutaro Furukawa, who was tasked with showing him the ropes and getting him learned on how to be a real Yakuza. Despite the surprisingly cordial turn of events, however, a potentially damning reality was made most clear. This chance was to be his only chance. Humiliate him again, and well, he'd be a dead man. Up again, he did not, however, and from then on, thanks to Furukawa's mentorship and a healthy dose of can-do attitude, Taoka Yakuza's resume began to fill out fast, with him soon becoming one of the most trusted soldiers of the Yamaguchi. This was a genius move by the boss. Because he could just have him killed, sure, for being like this, but the forgiveness there for someone who's an animal like this is that is a way to get some hardcore loyalty. I simply have to come in with a slight tangent here too. Okay then, George, specifically related to the point of bowing. Taoka's bent over groveling, having set my mind that way, and reminded me of something. We all know that the Japanese all about bowing, right? With them using the gesture at various different angles for hellos, goodbyes, thank yous, sorry, and all manner of other expressions of sentiment. Oh, I thought it was just like a polite thing. I don't know, just like thank you. Okay, I didn't realize there was more to it. I've become something of a pro at this, if I say so myself. A fella steps aside for me as I pass the corner. Have yourself a cheeky 15 degree. A good sir, a kind store assistant helps me out while I'm browsing. For you, madam, I'll double the degrees to 30, and so on and so forth. Oh, I had no idea it was so specific. Well, I bring this up not only to flex my efforts at cultural integration, but to draw attention to the fact that it turns out that they also do it when driving, which first came to my attention while I was up in Takamama, tazzing about in a little rented Toyota Roomie. You see, being the good Christian motorist that I am, I stopped to allow a lady to pull out of her driveway. And so grateful was she that she got a bit carried away with the bowing as she rolled out, slammed her head into the steering wheel. What? Knowing that she was likely embarrassed enough, I managed to contain my laughter until after it had pulled her out to another street. But I got to ask our Japanese viewers, is this a regular thing that happens often? Surely not, right? I wonder how many Japanese viewers we got. Say hello in the comments, Japanese viewers.
Hey, konnichiwa.
Anyway, with that, back to Taoka's Yakuza apprenticeship. As for the kind of workplace experience that filled up his burgeoning criminal resume, consider this as an example. The Tamanishiki affair. It went down in 1932 at a sumo wrestling event when a wrestler named Tamakawa, none of my sources mention his full name sadly, insulted one of Yamaguchi's own, specifically a wrestler turned underboss called Tamanishiki, with the pair apparently having beef that went back until before Tamashiki's career change. But whereas he was happy to let it go, Taoka was not, and in the resulting melee, Tamakawa was shoved to the floor, savagely beaten to the point of having his skull cracked open, and also when he was done and broken on the floor, he had 2 of his fingers sliced off by a dagger. Hell, this incident not only demonstrated how Taoka was sure enough learning how to use his powers for good, as far as the Yamaguchis were concerned anyway, but also showed just how good of a fighter he actually was. Remember, we're talking about a sumo wrestler here, and they're not exactly soft. For context, when all 240 pounds, and not exactly unused to being punched in the face of me, was having a bit of a friendly knockabout with an ex-pro sumo, long story, I had to tell him to stop messing about and do me proper-like. I proceeded to be picked up and tossed out of the ring, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. So the fact that Taoka managed to best one still at their peak so easily, well, that was a big deal indeed. Perhaps unsurprisingly, with ever more achievements along those lines stacking up, it wasn't long until Taoka was de facto a full member of the Yamaguchi. I really want to stress the word de facto, however, because, while yes, in real terms he was a member, in real pedantic terms he was not, as he had not been invited for a Sakazuki, the ceremony that formally brings someone into the fold. It's the equivalent of being made an Italian-American mobster, basically. As for what the ceremony actually is, if you happen to be wondering, the name Sakazuki comes from the shallow, flat sake cups used in the ritual. It's a deeply traditional, highly codified initiation rite that formally binds a new recruit, the Koban, to their boss, the Oyabun, and by extension, to the Yakuza family as a whole. The symbolism is rooted in feudal loyalty. Once you drink, you're not just joining an organization, you're becoming part of a hierarchical bloodline. Not biologically, of course, but socially and spiritually. Yeah, I didn't think they were like changing their blood. CRISPR. The ceremony itself is conducted with all the seriousness of a religious rite. Everyone wears black suits, not out of fashion, but for respect. The participants kneel on tatami mats. Cups are poured, usually with some intermediary, like a senior official or underboss, facilitating the exchange to make sure everything goes according to protocol and no one jumps the gun. The boss's sake cup is larger than the recruit's, which isn't an accident. It's a reminder in actual milliliters of the power imbalance. The recruit drinks first, then the boss, and the cups are sometimes exchanged and drunk again to seal the bond. Everyone watching knows, from this moment on, that man's isn't a stray dog anymore. He belongs to the family. And that's the important part. Belonging. Because once you've taken Sakazuki, quitting is not only frowned upon, it's practically a betrayal of the cosmic order. Yeah, once you're in, you don't leave. They'll just kill you, right? There's no formal resignation process. You don't get a reference letter and a farewell party. If you want out, you're expected to offer a piece of yourself, literally. Oh, okay, so there is an exit. Is this where they cut the fingers off? Like, down to, like, the knuckle or something? Or, like, clip off one or two segments of a finger? What are these parts called?
The joint.
That's where the infamous Yobutsume comes in, cutting off a finger as penance or severance. It's a way to show you understand the weight of your disloyalty, with the actual roots of the gesture being from the samurai practice, ensuring one can't hold a katana properly ever again. So, in Taoka's case, while everyone treated him like a member, gave him jobs, respected his muscle, let him hang out at headquarters, he hadn't been given that cup yet. He wasn't official. He was still, in the most technical and tradition-bound sense of the word, an outsider. A very useful, very violent outsider, but an outsider nonetheless. That would change, of course. But with most things in Taoka's life, it wouldn't happen quietly, and it wouldn't happen cleanly either. The event that would see him finally join the family proper was the Taisho shipping dispute, a messy, violent labor bust-up that started as a dock workers' strike and got out of hand, put it that way. So here's how it played out. In 1934, Kobe's docks were in turmoil. The Taisho Shipping Company, one of the major players in the area, had just sacked a number of unionized dock workers. The sacked men, members of the Seamen's Union, led by a chap called Kunitaro Hamada, they weren't having any of it. They called a strike, tensions skyrocketed, and the whole situation was shaping up to get very ugly very fast. Enter the Yamaguchi. Still under the leadership of Noboru, they stepped in and offered to mediate the dispute on behalf of Taisho, which is Yakuza-ese for intimidate and or punch their way to the desired resolution. This was a really common thing in Imperial Japan and its colonies too, by the way, with local Yakuzas often becoming the for-hire kingmakers in labor disputes. This doesn't feel like it just happened in Japan, right? The mafia and stuff were involved in, like, the unions and gangs in America as well, right? Hamada, to his credit, wasn't intimidated. He wanted to do right by his lads, and so he rejected Yamaguchi's offer outright, reportedly telling the group to keep their noses out of union business. And just like that, the matter went from being a professional one to a personal one. The Yamaguchi answered the perceived slight by heading to Hamada's house in force, intent on encouraging him to reconsider his words. But you know those blue-collar blokes that Hamada was so set out to help? Well, it turns out they were a loyal bunch, and so they responded to the intimidation in kind, and a mass brawl broke out in the street. In the chaos, one Yamaguchi member, as in had drunk from the cup member, was killed, and two more were seriously wounded. This was a humiliation, the likes of which can barely be put into words. They were meant to be the king-making muscle in this situation, and they'd been sent packing by a load of straight and true dock workers on their own turf, in view of their allies, in view of their enemies, in view of the press, who happened to be taking an ever-increasing interest in the ongoing labor dispute. More people are going to die, many more people, I get the feeling. In what certainly came as a surprise to me, however, Noboru remained stoic in the fallout of the brawl and tried to play diplomat legitimately this time. Okay, holy shit. If I was in a dock workers union and we killed some mobsters, we'd be like, I don't want to go outside. And then the guy's like, no, it's cool. I'd be like, no, you're just waiting there. Then you're going to cut my fingers off, dude. He managed to broker a shaky compromise the next day, but it all soon went to pot because of Taoka. You see, while his gaffer was keeping a cool head, he wasn't. He was burning with rage. He hadn't climbed out of the gutter and into the Yamaguchi's good books just to watch the whole organization go to pot, and especially not at the hands of a bunch of civilians, no less. As a result, he flipped, grabbing a dagger and popping down to sort Hamada out himself, stabbing him once before making his escape. As far as ups go, this was right up there with the worst of them. And in response, did Taoka channel a bit of that samurai spirit that supposedly permeated the organization he was aspirant to, hold his hands up to his monumental whoops-a-daisy, and go with his hands up to face the music from both his boss and the law? Did he bollocks? He made for the hills, ending up in the countryside of Kyushu Islands, and went to ground, leaving Noboru to hold the baby. Mercifully, Hamada survived, however, but that did nothing to lessen the crushing weight of the responsibility pressing down upon Taoka, and so when cooler heads prevailed, he handed himself into the law and was given a year behind bars for assault. Now I know what you're thinking. Hold on, George, isn't this whole bit meant to be explaining how Taoka properly joined the Yamaguchi? How can you be telling us about his boo-boo? And to that I say, well, hold your horses, friends, because we're getting there. Yeah, this seems like he fucked up again after being warned really not to fuck up. So, how's he going to get his way back in? Is it just because he's so ultra-violent that they just want him? You see, that year in prison was actually taken as proof of loyalty. And so, yeah, but you disobeyed the boss. And so he ended up failing upwards. Taoka hadn't come running to the family to try and get bailed out and have his arse wiped for him, nor had he gone spilling the beans about what he knew to try and get a plea deal. He'd simply gone to the coppers and taken full responsibility for it, stemming the potential brown-coloured and stinky splashback that could have easily come the Yamaguchi's way. All right, I see it, but I feel like, okay, cool, so we'll forgive you. We're not going to murder you. But apparently this is his in. Despite all of his rash impulsiveness, all his out-of-control rage, Taoka had actually been quite the good boy, and so he was rewarded being formally inducted in his absence on the 20th of January 1936, with the ceremony being given rerun once he got out. The Bear of Kobe had just taken his first formal step into the underworld proper. The Maid Bear. Despite the huge surge in his personal cloud that came from being formally inducted into the Yamaguchi, actually not a lot changed for Taoka in real terms, with him remaining a dependable attack dog fitted with a choke collar to stop him from getting too carried away. Those efforts to keep him in check were not exactly what you'd call successful, however, as in 1937 he'd be involved in yet another vendetta, and this time it would see him take his first life. Oh wait, he didn't kill the guy who he stabbed? Oh. Okay. The incident happened in Kobe's Fukuhara red light district when a street thug of no Yakuza affiliation named Masayoshi Anaga tried to extort money from a junior Yamaguchi, and when he refused, Masayoshi savagely beat him. Uh-oh. To be fair to Taoka, as far as Noboru was concerned, this was exactly the type of situation that should have been responded to with violence. He couldn't exactly be suffering such slights if he wanted to remain a serious name in Kobe's underworld, could he? The issue was that Taoka went way overboard even by the already rock-bottom standards of a Yakuza. As for what he did specifically, that would be to beat Masayoshi with a steaming hot iron kettle repeatedly until he was alive only in the most abstract sense of the word. F***ing hell. That wasn't the problem, however, a bit overboard perhaps, but very much of a done thing in face of such slights. The problem, i.e. murder, came as a result of what happened next, because it turned out that Masayoshi had a little brother named Tachiro, who was every bit as prone to fits of logic-filtered rage as Taoka, and upon seeing the condition his big brother was left in, Hachiru grabbed his trusty katana and stormed the Yamaguchi headquarters screaming for blood. Bro, that's not going to end well for you. Taoka, having no remorse for his actions, appeared with his own katana in hand before Hachiru could even make it beyond the entrance hall, stepping forward from the shadows like a figure in a kabuki play, calm, composed, and very clearly ready to kill. What followed wasn't a Hollywood-style, overly romantic clash of samurais, but a bitter and vicious fight to the death between two criminals, the kind of duel that ends not with style, but with someone lying in a spreading pool that contains as much hubris as it does blood. It was a quick duel too, as Hachiru was emotional and therefore sloppy. He charged straight for Taoka with his blade raised above his head, bellowing some last-minute threat that has been lost to history. Taoka, frankly not giving a f*** about the whole affair, and so not even having a drop of emotion clouding his judgment, simply took a sidestep, turned his wrists, and then drove his blade home, right into Hachiro's gut. Hachiro staggered, dropping his sword, and crumpled. The fight over before it had even truly begun. No drawn-out battle, no honourable standoff, just one man dead, and another still standing, quietly wiping blood from the edge of his blade. This time, Taoka couldn't just slip away though, and nor did he try to, meaning that he was arrested and charged with murder. At his trial in Kobe District Court, he was granted no leniency and a hefty sentence, 8 years in prison. Really? He was given no leniency, 8 years for murder. Let me introduce you to the American justice system.
I'm somebody's bitch.
Kazuo Taoka, 24 years old, was now a twice convicted violent felon, serving hard time in prisons all over Japan. And it turns out that 8 years is a long time to sit and stew, especially for a man like Taoka, whose entire personality thus far had been built around movement, be it through backstreets, power structures, or someone's orbital sockets. I have to say, though, is he going to sit and stew in prison? Aren't there, gangs in prison? Isn't this the sort of person who will thrive in prison and ends up, running the show? And, I don't know, running the, cigarette economy in prison. I don't know how prison works. Noodles and cigarettes, right? But instead of letting the prison walls close in around him, he chose to treat his second stretch inside as a kind of twisted finishing school. If the Yamaguchi had been his bachelor's degree, prison was to be his master's, and he graduated with full honors. So he's not sitting and stewing in prison. He's doing his gangster shit. As for the reality of that fluffy metaphor, rather than falling in with the usual inside crowd of gamblers pretending not to be gamblers and fellas who sold fermented plum wine round the back of the exercise yard, Taoka turned his attention to reading. And not just light reading either, he started tearing through works on Japanese nationalism, ultranationalist ideology, and political theory. Should we have so many books about nationalism and ultranationalism in a prison library? I mean, it's oh yeah, what's in this prison? Well, we've got all the basics. Mein Kampf. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion? Yes, all the basics. Among his favorites were books by Toyama Mitsuru, a well-known right-wing firebrand and imperialist agitator, and The Genyosha, an ultra-nationalist secret society that had once fused political extremism with underworld muscle. Why would these be in a prison library? How is he getting these books? This should not be allowed. Prison should be about reform, not about what's it called when you make someone an extremist? Indoctrination. Why exactly Taoka gravitated towards this stuff is anyone's guess. Maybe he saw in Toyama's writing a kindred spirit, a man who believed in hierarchy, discipline, and smacking people until they behaved. Or maybe, just maybe, he recognized that real power wasn't just muscle and loyalty, it was legitimacy. It was influence. It was pretending your violent little empire had a code of honor older than the country itself. And if that meant pinning a few nationalist slogans to the corkboard next to the Grang's protection schedules, well, so be it. Or maybe he was just a nationalist. Maybe he was just a little bit of a racist in there, you know? Who knows? He doesn't seem like the best dude in the world. Would it be a big stretch? Also, isn't Japan quite nationalistic? I'm just drawing a huge swing. Oh, God, that's a hole I shouldn't even try to dig myself out of. I take it back. Let's just see, I felt like the Japanese people, especially pre-World War II, which is where we are now, were quite pro-Japan. Closing the borders to all international trade, having them forced open and all of this stuff. And so, by the time his sentence was nearing its end, Taoka wasn't just a thug with a temper anymore. He was a thug with a vision, a man with a mission, and a disturbingly well-read sense of intellectual justification for it all too. Then came the twist of fate that turned his years of reflection into timely opportunity. In 1940, Japan held a celebration to mark what it claimed was the 2600th anniversary of the imperial line, an entirely made-up milestone based on mythical origins, but one that came with all the pomp, pageantry, and state-sponsored chest-beating that you would expect from such an occasion. And, as a part of these festivities, a general amnesty was granted to certain prisoners, and Taoka, much to the likely horror of the prison guards who had been dealing with his 1,000-yard stare for the past few years, found himself among them. And so, on July the 13th of 1943, he walked free. Why are we giving general amnesty to murderers? That doesn't seem... He killed someone. He got 8 years in prison. They're like, okay, and you can get out early. That man. The last time it seen the outside world, Japan was high on the fumes of empire, strutting about East Asia like it owned the place, which, to be fair, it increasingly did. But by 1943, that high had long since worn off, and the come-down was increasingly grim for the land of the rising sun. So let's rewind the tape a little for context. Oh, we know the context. It's the Second World War. Doesn't end brilliantly for Japan. Spoiler alert. Back in 1937, while Taoka was busy with his first kill, the Japanese Empire, which already controlled Taiwan, Korea, and several small Pacific islands, as well as a few Hong Kong-esque settlements in China, as well as Manchuria, decided it was time to up the ante and commenced a full-scale invasion of China proper, specifically on the 7th of July. It was meant to be a quick victory. China wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders back then, having spent a century being exploited and having its limbs chopped off by the Europeans, and then falling into rampant banditry and civil wars of all stripes when millennia's worth of imperial rule under the emperors was toppled following the 1911 nationalist revolution. Japan, therefore, expected a nice quick victory, send in the lads, overwhelm China with superior firepower, and then to the winner the spoils. Didn't go like that. Also, China's really fucking big. Except that's not what ended up happening, as you well know, as the then leader of said nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek, had crushed said banditry and all of the civil wars, save for one with the communists that he had yet to put a lid on. Again, you know how that goes. As a result, China, though battered and bruised, could just about manage to put up a half-decent resistance to Japan, with their initial quick advance down the coastline and a smidge into interior China, quickly bogging down into a good old-fashioned war of attrition. From there, they made slow if pyrrhic progress into China, before making the mother of all whoopsie-daisies in December 1941, invading the whole of East Asia at the exact same time. And I do mean basically the whole of it too, as from the 7th to the 9th of that month. It's like 3 days, guys. And there's a list here, attacked Pearl Harbor, invaded the Philippines, a US colony, invaded Guam, attacked Wake Islands, invaded Malaya, then a British colony, invaded Singapore, then a British colony, invaded Hong Kong, again a British colony, invaded Thailand, independent, invaded the Dutch East Indies, no prizes for guessing whose colony that was, and attacked Papua New Guinea. Guys, this is a lot of invasions for like 3 days. Their logic for such an insanely scaled attack was simple: push anyone who could threaten their growing continental hegemony out in one fell swoop, making a counterattack all but impossible. That is not what happened, however, as a series of strategic blunders meant that though battered and bruised, their new enemies were far from out of the fight, and then, after a year or so of riding high, Japan began to get pushed back. Come their defeat, the situation was nothing short of disastrous. They had suffered upwards of 3 million dead. Their navy basically didn't exist anymore, and 160,000 tons of firebombs had been dropped on the home islands, and that's before I even mentioned the 2 atomic bombs. They say a picture speaks 1,000 words, so to give you an idea, I'll ask our editor to now show you a few before and after pictures of the Japanese cities from this time. Here's Hiroshima. Here's Nagasaki. Here's Tokyo. And here's Taoka's stomping ground of Kobe. All of this meant that by Taoka's release in 1943, the Japanese people were already living in a truly sorry manner. Food rationing had intensified, luxury goods were gone, black markets were beginning to sprout like weeds. Small at first, but growing bolder by the month. If I was Taoka, I'm like, I smell opportunity. The police were overworked and increasingly outgunned. Opportunity! And as able-bodied men were conscripted and sent off to die in the jungles of the Pacific, the vacuum back home was waiting to be filled, and I'll say it again, opportunity. In other words, the country was ripe for people like Taoka. Because if there's one thing organized crime loves, it's disorder. When the systems of state start to buckle, when food disappears, morale collapses, and confidence in authority nosedives, that's where gangs thrive. They fill the cracks. They step in with their own rules, their own order, and their own sense of justice, even if it's enforced with batons and blackmail. And Taoka, he saw it all coming like a storm on the horizon. To him, this Japan wasn't a country in crisis, it was a burgeoning new market, a land of opportunity, open for business, and in a desperate need of men who could make things work, however brutally. The time had come to put the results of his prison pontificating into practice. The timing couldn't have been better for the Yamaguchi too, because do you remember Noboru? Well, he was dead, having died in 1942 as a result of lasting complications from injuries he picked up in a mass brawl back in 1940, and without him, the Yamaguchi, well, they didn't really do anything, with the group going into a holding pattern of sorts, where his lieutenants tried to keep things duct-taped together and largely failed to do so. Get the feeling someone's going to bring this all around. Between members being swept up by the state during conscription roundups, killed in the early air raids, or just being kept so busy by various other wartime complications that they lapsed on their duties, they just couldn't get anything done, much less think about the big questions like who was to sit atop now that Noboru was gone. Seeing the state of the wider family that he was now a proper part of, Taoka proceeded to say, "F*** that," and simply set up his own crew rather than trying to deal with it. It was under Yamaguchi umbrella, it should be noted. Don't forget just how violently loyal this guy was. It'd take far more than a bit of managerial jiggery to make him turn his back on that. And so, the now 30-year-old Taoka, he's been in prison for like a better part of a decade, and he's done all this He's 7 years younger than me. 8 years younger than me, just on my birthday, oh no. And he started flipping through his Rolodex and got in touch with all the handy blokes that he knew that weren't dead, or who weren't very soon about to be in some far-off tropical jungle somewhere. And he got to work. A nation in ruin. And work he did. Taoka and his nascent crew kept their heads down and their hands very, very busy. There wasn't much glamour in it. No grand shootouts, no high-stakes negotiations, just the hard graft of rebuilding an underworld infrastructure from the cracked foundations up. And frankly, even by the perverse standards of a mobster, it would be hard to find glamour in such circumstances, even if one wanted to. Opportunity, however, now that was in ample supply. Food was scarce, fuel was rarer still, and most police were far too busy managing civilian evacuation zones or stringing up military deserters to care about organized crime. They were perfect conditions for Taoka to establish a foothold. Bro the timing of this is just insanely perfect for him. You know, in like things in life just is like, wow, you came at this at the right time. Like, I feel like I started doing like fact stuff on YouTube at just the right time. At, like, not through any like genius of my own or something. It just seemed to be like, wow, okay, this is taking off. I didn't know it. I just happened to be doing it at the right time. So much of this stuff, like about people who become successful like this guy and stuff, it's just like right place, right time. This guy's fucking nailed it. He didn't just wait for opportunity, though. He manufactured it. A district has just been leveled and all communications are out? Well, send in the lads to run messages. A raid has destroyed a town's infrastructure? Send in trucks to move people and supplies in and out. A zealous military officer is keeping a strong eye over their warehouse full of rice. Come see Taoka, and a bribe or a leathering as needed can be organized in no time at all. In short, he made his newly founded organization useful. To gang affiliates, to desperate civilians, to anyone who still wanted things to work in a world that increasingly didn't. And in doing so, he built loyalty. Quietly, systematically, a web of favors, debts, and obligations that would pay off massively once the war finally ended, which eventually would, on the 2nd of September 1945, with Japan's total and unconditional surrender. I bet that this guy's seeing that, and like, while most people in Japan are like, oh, this is it, this is the end, this is bad, he's probably like, I'm just going to go about my day and I'm going to keep making money and this doesn't seem like it's going to affect me. Maybe it even affects me in the positive way because society's going to be a mess for a while. Not that that really changed much for Taoka, there we go. Sure, he no longer had to suffer the risk of waking up to find that his entire city had caught fire courtesy of a squadron of B-29s, which no doubt was nice for him, but otherwise it remained business as usual. Everything was still in ruin, everything was still in short supply despite ships finally making it in again, and the police were still barely operational, even if their numbers had been boosted somewhat by American occupation troops taking on roles as auxiliary officers. Something that did change, however, was the emergence of black markets. And I mean that quite literally in this case too, as I'm referring to Yamaichis. These were physical, but unofficial, and technically unlawful marketplaces that popped up all over Japan, where people bartered, sold, and hustled anything that they were able to in order to survive, with not an insignificant portion of what was sold coming from the US's surprisingly generous aid shipments in the immediate aftermath of Japan's surrender. Taoka was all over this naturally, and totally controlled the ones in and around Kobe. After all, who was it who got the supplies to the market to begin with, by way of falling off the back of a lorry or by their guards, Japanese and American alike, going for conveniently timed smoke breaks? Incentivized smoke breaks, I imagine, allegedly. His control, however, was frequently challenged not from other Yakuza but from gangs of former colonials, notably Koreans and Chinese, the majority of whom had found themselves in Japan after having brought over as slave laborers before the surrender, with little regard for the place that they found themselves in, and frankly, can't blame them for that given how they got there. Some from these groups formed gangs of their own, eager to strip the copper out of the walls of the country that had taken everything from them. Many Japanese also derogatorily called these people Sangokujin, literally people of the third countries, and more broadly carrying the implication that they were neither Japanese nor Western, and that was a bad thing. Does it really matter? It's like, you just lost. We're not your colonies anymore. We're here to take the copper from your houses. You dicks. Needless to say, between the slavery and the attitude of some of the locals, a happy and wholesome melting pot of diversity, the situation was not, and tensions were rather high. To Taoka, however, even this was an opportunity. Present himself as a patriotic nationalist out to defend his downtrodden countrymen against this supposedly encroaching foreign menace, and to have a cracking opportunity to clear out the competition and be publicly lauded for it as well. Nothing like an enemy. Like, if you need to rally the troops, if you need to get people on your side, there is nothing like pointing out an enemy and being like, that's the bad guy. We're against him. It's cheap, but it works.
It's their fault. That's right. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault.
With that in mind, he formed a Jikaidan, or self-defense corps, and set them off foreigner bashing. The corps was actually just his gang, only temporarily rebranded for the sake of optics. Incidentally, his outfit was also finding its numbers, ever bolstered by local lads returning home from the military around that time, many of whom had spent as many as 8 years deployed to China, and as a result didn't exactly have many marketable skills besides fighting. A happy little accident for Taoka, to be sure. Right time, right place, everything lining up. It was part civic duty, part ethnic turf war, and 100% beneficial to Taoka's rise. By violently challenging the foreign gangs and bringing a semblance of order to the Kobe markets, Taoka quickly earned a reputation as the man who saved Kobe from chaos. The war being settled also gave the Yamaguchi a time to pause, breathe, and consider the big questions. Who the hell was going to be the big boss? And I'm sure you can see where this is going. Did they pick anonymous Yakuza number 65, whose antics were notable enough to even get them a Wikipedia page, much less a video on this podcast, most illustrious? Or did they pick Taoka, a man whose loyalty to the Yamaguchi was as dependable as the sun rising tomorrow, and who had single-handedly kept the organization going using a bit of outside-the-box thinking? Yes, of course they picked Taoka. He rose up that group so quickly. And in October 1946, the Yamaguchi elders gathered and formally elected him as the third-generation boss of the entire group. This was a big deal, to put it mildly. Sure, his competence and loyalty was in no doubt, of course, but he wasn't an actual Yamaguchi, was he? No, he was in the family by way of the shared sippy cup, not by blood, and it was by blood that such things typically went. But that was just how big of a deal he was, and how successful his efforts have been. I gotta say, respect. Like, meritocracy is just a way better way of doing things. If you end up just choosing it by blood, you end up with a situation like Succession, where everyone's a bit shit. It's like, why are we choosing this guy? Because he is the son. It's like, it makes no sense. It'd be like, in 20 years, I'll be like, who should take over doing all of these YouTube channels? Should it be the super competent person I've worked with for years? Or should it be my kid who's just left university and knows nothing? Obviously not. Just let him take the money. Easy. I should stress that the Yamaguchi was still actually quite a small organization around this time too. They were still based pretty much entirely in Kobe and only had around 30-odd members on the books. That's made members. They, of course, had quite a few more working as contractors, as Taoka had back in the day, but still, they were not big at all in the grand scheme of things. And of course, things would not stay that way forever, though. And what do you know? This is exactly the part of the story where things started to get just a bit big, both for Yamaguchi and Taoka himself. Here we go. I mean, I know it's brutal and I know he's killed someone, but this is just such a fascinating rise to power. In the 1940s through to the 1950s, the Yamaguchi would see a complete reversal of its fortunes, transforming from a ragtag post-war gang of ne'er-do-wells into an enormous, as well as highly organized crime empire, and it was all down to Taoka and his frankly expert leadership. He didn't do it just by waving guns around, although, make no mistake, there was plenty of waving guns around. No, instead his true genius lay in his attempts to modernize the Yakuza, blending legitimate business and illegitimate rackets in a way that simply hadn't been done in the Japanese underworld before. In fact, so extreme and successful were his efforts that it really isn't exaggeration to say that the entire modern Yakuza model, off-fictionalized in various media as it is, comes from him and his methods. Wow. Okay. And to demonstrate just how fresh his ideas were, let's talk about one of his first moves as the boss, one that, as far as breaking from tradition went, was about as extreme as it got: the banning of traditional vices, i.e. drug dealing and gambling. Whoa! Okay, an outwardly peculiar move to be sure, as after all weren't such things Yakuza staples, just as they were for basically any criminal organization that has ever existed in any culture ever. Yeah, it'd be like drug dealing, gambling, and prostitution or trafficking, that kind of thing. Is the even seedier, more criminally ones. Money laundering, I guess. But I guess that's from the drug dealing and the gambling. Or maybe the drug dealing leads to the gambling, which is the money laundering. I don't know. Most of my gang knowledge is from Breaking Bad.
You're goddamn right.
And indeed, yes, they were. But Taoka was having a big brain moment, you see, as he had come to fully appreciate a wider problematic situation that few others of his criminal kin did. That being that their gambling trade had been absolutely devastated by the government, not by harsh police crackdowns, mind you, but by legalizing it. Sort of. Is Japan the country with the Pinocchio machines? Not Pinocchio machines. It's like Pikachu machines, something like that? Where there's the thing, the balls and they roll down and it's some sort of weird legal loophole. Pancho? Something like this. I'm just naming things that aren't this, but you know what I mean. You maybe don't know what I mean. Gambling in Japan was, and indeed still is, a weird one. Strictly speaking, all gambling was banned by the 1907 Penal Code, as passed by Law Number 45, as it was called, and despite World War II, or more rather the extreme transformation of the country that occurred following it, that law continues to apply to this very day. There are, however, exceptions to this, most famously Pachinko! Boom! There we go. I used to know a guy with a surname Pachinko, I think. Was his surname Pachinko? Something like that. He wasn't Japanese, which as far as the law is concerned, totally isn't gambling. This is because if you win, you don't get paid out in cash, you just get paid in small-sized, highly valuable prizes that you just happen to be able to immediately sell to a fella in a booth in the exact same building. It's such a loophole. A blag of monumental proportions if there ever was one, even if I myself do happen to be for those Evangelion branded ones you see in the parlors at the minute. What? I don't know. I've never been to Japan, don't know anything about Japan. The most I know about Japan, I mean, obviously from the videos I make, is from Lost in Translation. Our Japanese viewers will know what I mean, the ones with the giant 3D Unit 1 head at the top. All right then. Besides Pachinko, however, exceptions also currently exist for so-called public sports, as the law called them, with specific examples being horse racing, motorcycle racing, and motorboat racing. But unlike Pachinko, which is just a pure blag of legal technicality, these were proactively allowed by the state under its own monopoly in post-war Japan, with the idea being that it would help to generate revenue from the state, provide entertainment to a populace that really needed it, and also help starve organized criminals of cash. This does seem like a big win to do this. And naturally, given that building a tab up with the state came without the risk of having your legs broken, gambling-inclined members of the Japanese population began flooding to these establishments instead, and it absolutely decimated the bottom line for all Yakuza syndicates. Knowing that then, I'm sure Taoka's logic is obvious. Why risk police crackdowns to run ever less profitable dice games in the back of shady bars? It just wasn't worth it. His logic was similar when it came to drugs too. Sure, unlike gambling, shifting the nose candy came with the potential for vast profits, but equally, it also came with a burgeoning enthusiasm from the lawmen to see the peddlers' faces get mashed by way of the nightstick. The risk-to-reward ratio simply didn't check out as he saw it. There was also an honor element to it too, with wider Japanese society viewing illicit narcotics as a societal cancer, although according to all the books I read in order to read the script, this was very much a side bonus sort of thing, and his main motivation was really very much the pragmatic one of not getting nicked. He also nicked his, I believe, British slang for getting arrested. I've never heard that on like an American show, getting nicked. Getting busted, I suppose, would be. Did they say, Grand Theft Auto London, that old 2D one that I played as a kid? Did they say busted or nicked when you died? When you got arrested. I think it was busted still though, right? Showing my age. He also really rolls with the no drugs angle too, even going so far as to co-found a public anti-drugs organization called the Alliance for a Drug-Free Nation, later down the line in 1963. An organized mobster founding an anti-drug organization is weird enough, I know, but it gets weirder still, because in founding the organization, Taoka also teamed up with Fusai Ichikawa, a lady who was both a member of the Japanese Dart representing Tokyo and a feminist of sufficient kudos that many revere her today as the grandmama of Japanese feminism. Not gonna lie, I low-key love this. What an utterly unexpected pairing. You couldn't make it up. I also like it. But of course, Taoka's legitimization and modernization efforts went far beyond just taking an anti-drug and anti-gambling stance. And so he also insisted that all but the busiest and or the handiest of Yamaguchi members got themselves a 9-to-5. That's also not a bit or hyperbole, by the way. That straight up was one of his mandates, with the idea being that it would A, bring in extra revenue to the organization, and B, further help legitimize them as an enterprise. Ideally, starting one's own business was the ideal solution. Partly this was just because entrepreneurs tend to earn more money than salarymen, so obvious win, but also partly because when you are your own boss, you've got plenty of workplace freedom, and so don't have to go bowing and groveling to your boss for an early lunch in order to be able to slink away and tick that day's illicit chores off your to-do list. I got a thing there. Like, entrepreneurs tend to earn more money than salarymen. Yeah, but don't most entrepreneurs just not succeed very well and so make no money and then go become salarymen? And also, like, I don't know, it's like, okay, you have workplace freedom. My workplace freedom, I eat lunch at my desk doing my emails. People get like an hour's lunch break. I don't. I just don't take breaks. I just eat my lunch at my desk and then I get on. I think there's less freedom. It's just by choice. There are also some quotes from Taoka on the matter of his underlings finding legitimate work that I absolutely love. For example, quoting here, "From now on, Yakuza have to read the financial newspaper." And another quote, "You've got at least to pay attention to stock trends." I hope you find this as amusing as I do, folks. I mean, come on. I get he had good logic behind it and all, but the sheer subversive absurdity of it all, I just love it. We're talking about an organised crime syndicate here, and here he was telling mobsters to pound the pavement with resumes in hand and keep an eye on the markets. I enjoy it. With time, Taoka would refine this further, and how it would eventually end up working was that the Yamaguchi would essentially be a dichotomous organization, half of it legit, half of it naughty, straight down the middle, with them both operating through separate command structures, both of which unified with the man at the top. That seems quite smart. Earn, like, your money illegitimately, then put it into legitimate things, seems like quite a sensible business strategy. There was some diffusion in manpower across both parts, however, with all but the most heavily vouched for upstart Yakuza usually starting in the normal part of the organization, after which, had they proven their worth and loyalty, they could be scouted for the, let's call it how they saw it, the sexy and exciting part, which was what they all obviously really wanted to be doing, or else they'd just have got a civilian job where their boss wasn't a terrifying mega mobster. Yeah, it's like, do you want to work for this shop, or do you want to work for the regular ass shop? I want to work for the regular ass shop. I don't want to get my fingers chopped off, thank you. And I don't want to be promoted into gang. Interestingly too, managers and senior leadership in the legitimate world would more often than not be veteran Yakuza who came back over from the sexy half. A genius move on Taoka's part to make sure that the enterprises remained both competent and loyal, because they were lads who knew full well what could happen if they got greedy or dropped the ball. That is super smart. This guy is really, really very on it. And that is just a win for everyone. Because I imagine these old dudes, they're like, I don't want to be chopping guys' fingers off. I just want to run like a business. I just want to be like sitting at a desk. And the guy's like, perfect, good news. And what were these legitimate businesses, I hear you ask? Oh, I just imagined it to be like shops, gambling things. What else? Laundromats. The kind of semi-grey area businesses where it just seems very easy to launder money. Car washes, Breaking Bad. Well, pretty much anything that made money. If it earned, the Yamaguchi were keen to get a finger in the pie. But two ventures, in particular, stand out and are worth a closer look. The first was Taoka's so-called waterfront labor empire. He capitalized on Yamaguchi's home turf, the port city of Kobe, by diving headfirst into the stevedoring business. That is, loading and unloading ships. Oh, I did know what a stevedore was, but I'd forgotten. That's such a strange word. It's like, what do you do? I load and unload ships. I'm a stevedore. Under his leadership, the group set up front companies, most notably the Koyo Transport Company, which effectively became a Yamaguchi-run dockworkers union. This move wasn't random. Taoka himself had roots in port labor, remember, and had also built a reputation for uniting dock workers during the war. So really, it was a no-brainer. It was just a scaling up and taking a step to the side into lawful legitimacy for something he'd otherwise been doing anyway. He also had the smart idea of mass hiring burakumin to expand his labor pool. All right, what is a burakumin? Well, that just means those from historically outcast social groups and ex-convicts, people who found it difficult to secure regular employment. Yeah, it is such a weird system where it's like, you get out of prison and it's like, then you go apply for a job and it's like, they ask you, were you in prison? You're like, yes. And it's like, well, no job for you. You got to go do criminal stuff, being that you're a criminal and everything, which isn't great for like keeping people out of prison. Recidivism is the word, isn't it? Naturally, such people were very, very grateful to be given any opportunity at all, and were generally loyal to the hilt, and also came pre-groomed to look the other way should they happen upon something that was none of their business. As an extra bonus, he was able to play his hiring of society's forgotten people as an altruistic move, one in which he buried prejudice and gave marginalized individuals a place to belong. Dude, look, it's just about loyalty. It's like, if you pick someone up who doesn't have a ton of options, they're going to be very loyal to you. If someone has like 6 other job offers, then they're just, they'll be like, well, they know they could jump ship at any time to a better offer. It sounds almost civically minded, doesn't it? I mean, if you look at it very briefly and spend no effort looking at all beneath the surface. Or at least it does until you remember who was writing the paychecks and the real reason he had targeted such people for recruitment. Taoka would take things even further, however, and integrate himself with real unions. In 1953, for example, when the All Japan Port Cargo Handling Promotion Association, it's a hell of a mouthful, or I suppose it's less in Japanese, it's Zenkoshin, which is a lot easier. It was just, how do they fit so many words into that? The All Japan Port Cargo Handling Promotion Association. In Japanese, it's basically one word. This was established to represent Japanese dock workers at the national level, and he helped out the chairman, Kotaro Fujiki, with a few donations, and got himself appointed vice chairman of the council. Ah yes, corruption. This all did wonders for his reputation, perhaps unsurprisingly, and by 1959, Taoka had become so whitewashed and publicly squeaky clean that he was even made honorary chief for the day by the Kobe City Fire Department, and my books describe him as having a grand old time doing so, spending the whole day with an ear-to-ear grin across his face and a firefighter's helmet plonked firmly on his head. But alas, try as I did, I couldn't find any photographs of that fateful day. A shame too, as they sound like they'd be highly amusing. Yeah, I'd like to see that. We use Mid-Journey. Just take his face and put him in a fireman's helmet. Make him happy. Give him a big gangster smile. Give him a Tommy gun. The second major legitimate venture of note was in the entertainment industry. If the dogs were Taoka's blue-collar gold mine, then show business was his glittering playground. It all began in 1957 when he co-founded the Kobe Genosha, or the Kobe Talent Company. Through it, he began managing and promoting singers, actors, and touring productions, and not the B-list either. The group's biggest claim to fame was their association with Masura Hibari, one of the era's most iconic Japanese pop stars. Why does this guy need to be a criminal? It sounds like he's genuinely good at business. And thanks to my being a massive weeb, that's someone who likes Japanese culture, found that out surprisingly late in life, all just had to know I was going to come in with a tangent about her, and here it is. I have to admit, with my knowledge of Japanese music very much starting with city pop, so in the late 1970s, in other words, I hadn't heard of her. Accordingly, I did a bit of research, and I was confused. Wikipedia, IMDb, all were very insistent that she tragically passed in 1989, yet Spotify was insistent that she continued releasing music well after that point. I mean, both could be true. It didn't Prince have a ton of music that he never released? I mean, this is easily explained by the fact that they're all compilations, but far more confusingly, it says that she's still touring. Sounds like Spotify screwed that up, to be honest, George. In the original draft of the script, I tied off my musings on this peculiarity by making a passing joke about my being an idiot, and one who no doubt would become enlightened onto an obvious explanation the moment I opened the comment section after this episode went live, but it kept gnawing at me, so I eventually said f*** it, and took the financial hit on an international call to Cultural Arts Theatre in the city of Naha to ask what the crack was. Are international calls still expensive? I feel like now I don't know what apps you use. I have an app, I can't remember what it's... Oh, I know what it's called. There's an app called Hushed, which sounds like a porn site, but it just gives you international numbers for making calls locally. I think it's close to free. And you know what I discovered? I discovered that my working hypothesis of me being an idiot was indeed correct, because it was a tribute concert. There's a reason I never claimed to be intelligent. Yeah, I mean, also it sounds like Spotify screwed up, because they should say tribute concert, right? Taoka himself acted as Hibari's patron and mentor, and even held the title of vice president within a personal production company. With that kind of access, he came to control concert bookings west of Kyoto, turning the Kansai region's entertainment scene into his own personal fiefdom. At the time, people would say, west of Kyoto, no entertainment event can succeed without Taoka. And they weren't exaggerating. He didn't just shake down theatre owners for protection money. He essentially was the theatre owner. Figuratively, of course. And this control didn't stop at music. Why figuratively? Why doesn't he just buy all that? It seems like he's excellent at this. He should just go straight, dude. Just go straight. And this control didn't stop at music. Taoka's influence also began bleeding into the film industry. This was not only a logical next step from music, but it was also around the exact same time as the Yakuza film genre properly started to be cemented as a thing, vaguely in the 50s and 60s. The genre's rise around that time was not a coincidence either, because Taoka, contrary to what you may imagine from a mobster wanting to stay below the radar and all that, actually encouraged such films and found them absolutely tremendous fun. From how it is described, you know when you watch a war movie with your veteran uncle and he spends half of it pointing out all the inaccuracies and the other half reminiscing in the rose-tinted memories it conjures? Well, yes, it was like that, but with crime. It also didn't hurt his enjoyment that he was sometimes brought on as a consultant for these movies too. And yes, you didn't mishear me, the actual active, not retired mobster was brought on to advise on the accuracy of mobster movies. This guy's having a good-ass time with his life. I mean, he spent 8 years in prison, but otherwise it's going swimmingly. Partly, or in fact, mostly to be fair, this was done as a financial bung to him, a tribute of sort to keep him sweet, but that didn't really stop him from also usually taking such roles surprisingly seriously. Like I say, he actually really enjoyed these movies. Also, an active mob boss consulting on your mob movie seems like a really good idea. Like, it sounds like that would actually be useful. It's not like, oh yeah, what's he doing? Well, he's executive producer. Doesn't really do just pays for things. And all that swanning about on set naturally led him to becoming familiar with and then befriending the big cinematic tough guys of the day, particularly Ken Takakura and Bunta Sugawara, two actors who would go on to embody the idealized image of the Yakuza boss in Japanese cinema. These were the brooding, honor-bound anti-heroes who glared more than they spoke, never struck first unless absolutely necessary, and who always died with their principles intact, usually in a hail of bullets or poetic monologue. I wonder why. This guy's just making them look awesome, because he's this guy in real life. In other words, exactly the kind of image that Taoka himself wished to present to the world. Small wonder he loved these movies so much. Turns out they were exercises in propaganda as much as they were ego. Yet this is all a very good move. I think this is all fascinating and very well pulled off. And the industry, for their part, loved him right back too. He was good press after all, so why wouldn't they? A real-life kingpin playing the part of an advisor, a myth made flesh, dropping by the set to nod solemnly and point out that no, actually, a real boss would never wear his Hiyori that loose. It was nothing short of a dream come true for them. Taoka's credibility in the industry extended off set too. He hosted parties, paid for rap feasts, and leveraged his power to help grease the wheels when productions hit snags. So beloved was he that one executive even once said, anonymously of course, that working with Taoka was like having the producer, the fixer, and the security team all rolled into one man in a very nice suit. He's the security team. It's like he doesn't need to do anything. He just stands there and is like, you better not around. You know who I am? Do you know who I am? Even the press and long-term viewers will know what I think of them, handled Taoka with the kind of cautious reverence usually reserved for minor royalty or venomous snakes. Reporters who covered the entertainment beat understood where the lines were. You could talk about the actors, you could talk about the films, you could mention Taoka politely, but woe betide the journalist who decided to dig too deep or use the wrong adjective. There's a reason why I was strip mining newspaper articles to help me piece this story together, and I very rarely found articles titled Mobster Meddling in Movie Money, because for all of his apparent restraint, all of his charm, he was still a gangster. Yeah. I like this. I know. This would make an absolutely cracking movie. It's probably already a movie in Japan, isn't it? It probably is. But then I'd have to I'd have to read subtitles. I should just be okay with reading subtitles, but I don't really watch foreign movies because I like them to be in English and I don't like dubbing, and I know it's incredibly uncultured, and my parents, who are like very cultured, they're always like judging me. It's like, oh Simon, we saw this brilliant movie, you'd love it. Yeah guys, but it's got subtitles, doesn't it? It's Norwegian. Oh, I'm such a pleb. Through his involvement in the industry then, Taoka had done something very few criminals in history manage. He had culturally legitimized himself and earned a bloody fortune doing so. He wasn't just tolerated, he was respected. Maybe not by the law, maybe not by the old money elite, but by the industries that controlled public sentiment, music, cinema, publishing, nightlife. In those circles, his name carried weight. And not just threat weight, but real value, real influence, real prestige. But what of his criminal activities while all of that was going on? When Taoka wasn't establishing unions and trying to worm his way into the public's heart, what was he up to? And in one word, That would be violence. The Expansion Wars. Let's pick up the story of his criminality back in the mid-1950s. By this time, Taoka had been the Yamaguchi's boss for a fair while, and things were going well. No longer was his outfit just a scrappy poor gang from Kobe. They were now the criminal big boys in the city, an expansion facilitated entirely by their control of the regional black markets in the immediate post-war period. And yet, Taoka yearns for more. His first goal? Make the Yamaguchi not just the key players in Kobe, but the only players in Kobe. His first target was the local small fry syndicates, most of whom saw the writing on the wall and decided it was better to shake hands than get smacked. They joined up, signed on, and rebranded under the Yamaguchi banner. Smart move, guys. It wasn't a choice. And sure, while there was an element of shame in being absorbed like that and not having made it on their own, such arrangements typically worked out very well for them. Yeah, it's like your company getting bought by Microsoft or Google or something. It's like, is it out of your control? Would you have liked to make it bigger? Yeah, maybe, but they're also giving you a load of money. You're getting that island's money. They basically cracked on exactly as they had before, working the same streets as before, in pretty much the same way as before, minus drugs and gambling, of course, except now they had the extra backing of some big muscle if things ever went whoops-a-daisy. Not everyone was so cooperative, however. There were stubborn holdouts, those who were too proud to bend the knee, or others who simply didn't want to give up their gambling and drug rackets so they could do things the Yamaguchi way. To Taoka, this was simply unacceptable, and such groups were to be crushed, and thus began the Expansion Wars. The first target was the Hirari Syndicate, a tiny little outfit that operated in the little city of Komatsushima over in Tokushima Prefecture. They were actually tied to the Honda Syndicate, one of the few remaining major groups in the Kansai area that hadn't yet bent the knee to Taoka, so a retaliatory escalation was almost certain when he made a move. As for what went down specifically, some details proved hard to come by, but I was able to uncover that Taoka, probably quite wisely, at least tried to put a layer of separation between the Yamaguchi and the coming strike by sending allies from the Kotsutsuri Syndicate to do the dirty work, one of the groups who had willingly bent the knee to him. Arriving in Komatsushima during a summer festival, supposedly in the hopes that plenty of the Hirari boys would be drunk, distracted, or too busy to be much opposition, they launched a full frontal assault on the group's headquarters, with some sources saying they went in with bats and billy clubs, and others saying that they were heavily tooled up with firepower that formerly belonged to the Imperial Japanese Army. Formerly, like previously. I thought it was that, like, formerly, like on the paperwork, like they were borrowing it from the army. But I guess they just acquired it after the war. This is pretty intense. This is like full-on gang war. The latter would at least make sense. It wasn't exactly hard to come by in those days, given how much gear went unaccounted for when the Emperor's army demobbed after Japan's surrender. Dude, this was like, have you seen that movie, Lord of War, with Nicolas Cage, where he goes to that place and there's just piles and piles of AK-47s that they're selling by the kilo, because it's just like, yeah, they're all left over from the war and no one knows what happens. It's just crazy. Just all the stuff goes missing. Also, the number of nuclear missiles that have gone missing, it's pretty fucking terrifying. Whatever they used, though, the end result was the same. 1 man dead, 3 more well on their way to joining him if they weren't treated quickly, although I was able to find out their ultimate fate. Such sudden and violent events put Komatsushima, otherwise just a sleepy little town of no more than 40,000 people, on the map since the first time, well, ever, really. Why did they care so much about this tiny little town? It's 40,000 people. It was all poised to explode into further violence too, because would you believe it, neither Hirari nor the Honda were exactly chuffed about the situation. Such bloodshed was prevented, however, entirely by the efforts of a local politician whose name sadly wasn't recorded. He stepped in and personally begged the Yamaguchi and Honda to sit down and talk it out before the situation spiraled out of control. Now, this worked for a time, because soon enough a shaky status quo truce was called, one in which both sides agreed to take a deep breath, a step back, and leave the matter be. Wait, really? He just stormed your headquarters and murdered your dudes, and they're like, we're not going to surrender, but we're also not going to fight back. Let's have a truce. This seems like you're about to get crushed. As for when it stopped working, that would be about a year or so later. I'm kind of amazed that worked for a year. Turns out the leadership of the Honda were actually furious about the situation behind closed doors. And so, after the aforementioned year or so had passed, they could keep a hold of their cool heads no longer and sent a hitman from the Fukuda Syndicate, one of their vassal groups, to kill Yoshinil, the leader of the Kotsutsuru, He took multiple rounds and survived, however, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had tried, and that, in Taoka's world, was as good as a declaration of war. Bro, I feel like you were already at war, you just had a truce. It's like North and South Korea still at war. They just have a... Is it a truce? What's that 50s agreement? There's with the demilitarized zone? Oh, what's it called? Is it a truce? Because they're technically still at war. Like, I don't know. This is what you started the war by going and taking your guns and marching on their headquarters, my dude. Within days, he mobilized what could only be described as a small invasion force. 115 heavily armed Yamaguchi soldiers. He piled them into cars and ferries bound for Komatsushima. And they weren't just any goons, it was a murderer's row of Taoka's up-and-comers. Masao Yashara, Yuji Yoshikawa, and Kenshi Yamamoto, just to name 3. All 3 of them were men with a proven taste for blood and an eagerness to prove themselves to the boss man. The plan? Hit hard, hit fast, and make a bloody example out of anyone and anything flying Honda colors. Dude, this is 115 gangsters, scary-ass gangsters, descending on a town of 40,000 people to cause mayhem. This is insane. What they didn't count on, however, was the fact that the police had been watching. How many police are in a town of 40,000 people? And the moment the cars started rolling off the ferry, they were waiting. The result probably wasn't what you were expecting, which I assume would be a fierce showdown between Taoka and the lawmen. I was not expecting that. I was expecting the police to be like, boys, get the back on the ferry. And they'd be like, they'd look around, they'd be like, pretty surrounded, don't feel like getting shot today, we're not here for the police, we're here for the Hondas. And they'd get back on the ferry and they'd come back another day with a better plan. That's what I think would happen. I think that's sensible. Like, the boss man, oh god, what's the name of the main guy from today's episode? Taoka. He's hungry for blood and he wants this, but he's also very rational. And he's just going to be like, get back on the boat. But instead, just a few polite words and an agreement to turn around. Boom. And so it was that Taoka's mighty blitz, 115 mobsters strong, some carrying blades longer than a primary schooler, the rest stacked and locked and loaded with machine guns, was quietly and efficiently escorted back out of town before a single skull could be cracked. Yeah, honestly, that is exactly what I would expect. They go in, the information, the layout of the battlefield has changed. The police know about it. They don't want to murder the police. That's just going to be a bad time. And so they turn around and they're like, we'll come back another day. Some were arrested, mostly those who kicked off and didn't take the frankly very generous opportunity that the police offered them to just head home and call it a day. Yeah, these were the least rational people. It might sound like a bit of a weak move on the cops' part to some, and it certainly did in the contemporary opinion pieces that I leafed through. But I've got to be honest, I'm with the police on this one. Yeah, George, me too. I think this was absolutely the right way to go. Just be like, yo, you got an option. Get back on the ferry or don't. And they get back on the ferry. I think this is a win-win for everyone, especially the Hondas, but their time will come. Was there any outcome in which trying to arrest all of them or letting them carry on didn't end in a full-blown bloodbath, one that dragged civilians into the crossfire? Lord only knows how many people in Komatsushima would have ended up dead because a few detectives decided to play hardball. No. Good call, Komatsushima PD, as far as I'm concerned. Agreed. As for Taoka himself, while he was initially furious, convinced the police had made an absolute tit out of him and left him looking weak, he actually came around to feeling quite grateful for how it played out. Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't see this immediately. Just he seems like, I understand he's angry, but I thought his rationality would override his anger. And it turns out it did, ultimately. It wasn't his men turning back that people remembered. It was the fact that it sent them at all. That alone was enough to terrify his enemies, and it was a clear message. One that basically made sure all the other holdout syndicates in and around Kobe would willingly bend the knee, all for the price of a handful of junior members locked up on firearms possession charges. Totally a win-win, really. Still, Taoka wasn't done. All of that was just a skirmish. He wanted war, a vast and great conflict that would bring as much territory under his control as possible, as quickly as possible. And what do you know, just down the road from Kobe, there was a little place that you might have heard of called Osaka, Japanese second city, a neon-soaked labyrinth of cabarets, gambling dens, and nightclubs, all of which was worth big money. Dude, you gotta be a gangster and be looking at that place and being like, I should own that. That's some gangster shit. It's that perfect mix of like we're saying, like laundromats, casinos, pubs and nightclubs. Is the perfect grey zone business for a gangster. And with big money came big power, specifically in the form of the Mayu Syndicate. They weren't fools either. The underworld talks, and while Taoka hadn't yet made advances on their turf, they knew it was only a matter of time. Osaka was just too close, too grand a prize for them to assume otherwise. And yet, for years, nothing. The Yamaguchi kept making inroads all over Japan, and Osaka just remained eerily quiet. It was a criminal Cold War. Both sides knew that when the match was thrown on this powder keg, the resulting explosion just may have the power to level both Kobe and Osaka. Taoka finally started making his moves in the summer of 1960. Nothing too big, mind you, just the odd cabaret club purchase here, opening a hostess bar or two there, and of course, sending some of its lads down to keep an eye on his new acquisitions. He's in the periphery. What was the name of the clan? The May Syndicate? They'd just be like, interesting. I guess because we know what's going to happen. It's like, they don't know what's coming. I don't think they quite know the scale of it. For a time, Taoka had the upper hand, as the Meiyu did absolutely nothing in response to his encroachments. They just didn't know what to do. How the hell could they respond when they knew full well that a Komatsushima-style blitz was probably already being planned to counter or whatever move they made? I don't know, start building up your army? Like, it was only 115 dudes. Go recruit some dudes. Go get some machine guns. Prepare for war. Send a message of your own. In the end, however, the decision to act was made for them, as one night in Osaka's Minami district, a scuffle broke out between some soldiers of the Yamaguchi and Meiyu. I've no idea who started the shouting, and neither do I know who escalated it to punching, as such details seem to have been lost to time, but the end result was the same. The Osaka Cold War had gone hot. The Meiyu leadership was split on how to respond. Some lieutenants urged caution, fearing the outbreak of a wider gang war in the streets, which could only be bad for business, and others urged reprisal. No more appeasement, no more burying their heads in the sand. They were the bloody Osaka mob, and they were just letting themselves be pushed around by these fish-stinking upstarts. No. Action was what they wanted, and in the end, it was the choice for action that won the day. And so it was that 4 of the Meiyu's most loyal lieutenants piled into a blacked-out Toyota Crown, stacked with the heaviest hardware that they had pinched from the IJA cache, Imperial Japanese Army, there we go, and drove the 30-odd miles from Osaka to Kobe to Yamaguchi headquarters. Yeah, this seems like the right response. You gotta arm up. Show them who you are. They didn't go to a club. They didn't go to a satellite office. They went to the headquarters. I mean, yeah, so did Taoka and his gang when they went to that town with 40,000 people. I'm sorry, they've all got Japanese names and I don't remember them properly. I remember Osaka and Kobe, though. Those are big. They parked the car directly outside, rolled down the window, and began waving their weapons around in full view of anyone watching. No masks, no subtlety, just a trunk full of firepower and a shaky sense of self-preservation. Some witnesses claim they shouted challenges. Some claimed they revved the engine and demanded Taoka come out and face them. Others say they simply sat there grinning, waving the barrels of their guns back and forth like they were pointing out constellations. One thing is certain, however, they wanted to be seen. Taoka would not come out. It's not cowardly to stay inside. Why would you go out and get killed? You're just walking into death. I'd be like, I'd stay in there and be like, okay, let's kill these f***s. Get the sniper rifles. And they were seen. The guards on duty, probably expecting another easy evening of chain smoking and wall leaning, suddenly found themselves staring down the barrels of Meiyu steel. And did the Meiyu bills fire? Well, no. But did they need to? Also no. This stunt wasn't necessarily meant to kill anyone, although they absolutely would have taken the opportunity to drop Taoka had he presented himself. There you go. They'd have been fools not to. But they also knew full well that he wasn't going to come out, and so instead, it was meant primarily to taunt, to provoke, to make their escalating feud a personal matter. Taoka, however, didn't take the bait. As far as he was concerned, if he was dealing with big boys, they'd have had to get out of that Toyota, kick his door open, and start dropping people until their mags ran dry. What had been intended to be received as intimidating was taken as a sign of weakness, and so he carried on, exactly as he had been planning otherwise. It's a big game of brinkmanship, isn't it? And so he found himself in Osaka a few weeks later, specifically on the 9th of August, for the grand opening of his new cabaret clubs, specifically a place called the Mammoth Cabaret King. There, he was joined by 2 of his inner circle, Rokuharu Tanaka and Isaburo Nakagawa. And as much as we are seeing a bit more of real Taoka in this chapter, don't forget he was fundamentally quite the personable and likable chap when he wasn't kicking your head in. And so, of course, he wanted to hit the town with the lads and pour some ale down their throats to thank them for all their hard work for the Yamaguchi. Oh, and because Taoka, a chap named Yoshio Tabata, was also tagging along for the session. And why is he noticeable, I hear you ask? Well, no biggie. He's only the guy who basically invented Japanese music, a mega star of his time who's up there in Japan with, like, say, Frank Sinatra or Elvis in the US. So yes, kind of a big deal. The four of them ended up hitting many different bars that night, last among which was the Aoshiru Supper Club, a sort of classy and expensive joint that anyone who was in Osaka just had to be seen in of a weekend, and I suspect you can all see exactly where this is going. The Mayu were there too. And to make matters worse, it wasn't just any Mayu that was there, but Song Fakutai and Han Hake, two of their highest-ranking lieutenants, period. The situation got more scary, though, as Son and Han weren't alone. They'd brought friends, a lot of them, as one of their juniors had gotten out of prison, so everyone was out to celebrate. Between the dim lighting and the very attractive lady on stage, it did take a while for them to clock each other, but when they did, well, tense would be putting it mildly. The more booze-numbed patrons didn't have a clue, as fury was hidden behind polite silence and plastered on ear-to-ear smiles. Those who hadn't drunk their wits away, though, easily noticed the one part of the face that can tell no lies, the eyes, and on both sides they were burning with clear and evident rage. Some calm heads did remain, however, and so efforts were made to turn the temperature down a little bit, with a voice shouting out from the back of the Mayu pack that maybe Tabata could get up on stage and sing them all a song. Such efforts were in vain, however, as no sooner had the suggestion been made than a hotter-headed Mayu Jr. had picked up a heavy champagne bottle, one of those big you I have too much money sized ones. It's called a Magnum, a double size, and smashed it clean over Nakagawa's head. Then, as the last shards of glass fell to the floor, silence for about half a second, as Tanaka returned the favor, picking the attacker up, throwing him to the floor, then leaping on him and starting to go to town on his face with his bare knuckles. Fucking hell, shit got real. Then came the obvious next turn of events. Basically, every mobster in the place jumped to their feet and started laying into the opposition with either their bare hands or whatever weighty object was within arm's reach. Even Tanaka joined in, somehow still on his feet, which was, frankly, miraculous. Speaking from experience, getting glassed isn't usually something you just walk off, but there he was, back in the fray like nothing had happened. Never been glassed. Never really been in a fight. So, all a bit of a mystery to me.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
There was one person who kept their feet planted, however, and that was Taoka. He wasn't panicking, he wasn't flinching. He was just watching, intently. And what he noticed was that while both Tanaka and Nakagawa were absolute units of a man, and happily holding their own, 2 versus a dozen was only ever going to go one way given time. The bad way. So, he turned to Tabata, who by that point was practically hiding under his jacket, and told him to get outside and find somewhere safe. Oh, and while he was at it, could he send Joji Oja in? This was Taoka's driver, and for reasons tied to that role, he was not on the booze that night. That, and he hadn't been deemed worthy of the treat in the first place. His face mashing of late had proven lackluster, you see. Well, yeah, I mean, he's also his driver. He's going out for dinner with 2 of his, top lieutenants. He's not going to be like, yo, Bob, come and join us. Which I suppose would be a nice thing to do, but it would also be a bit weird. Tabata, for his part, didn't need telling twice. And so, within mere moments, Oda came crashing down the stairs and Taoka finally stepped away from his well-worn spot on the floor and got stuck in himself. Fortunately, no one was carrying anything shooty, so to some extent, the violence was reasonably minor, but unfortunately, you can still do a lot of damage with your fists and handy heavy things. To quote a dearly departed mentor of mine, you're only 1 punch away from a manslaughter charge, so don't be a f***ing idiot. Yeah, dude. And in this case, I don't think it would be a manslaughter charge, it would probably be a murder charge. If you're punching someone with the intent to do them a lot of harm, which these guys clearly are, at least under British law, and you kill them, that's murder. As for what damage was done, I struggle to think of a way to give specific details in a way that won't destroy that precious, sweeter-than-life itself mortgage-paying monetization. So let me put this in a vague way. The Yamaguchi came out on top, and Mayu was sent packing, as well as maybe taking a fatality or 2, depending on which source you're reading. This, as you no doubt suspect, was the point of no return in the escalation between the Yamaguchi and the Mayu. Pandora's box had been opened, and the price for closing it again would be paid in blood. By the time Taoka and his lads had returned to Kobe that same night, preparations had already begun. As an emergency, its on let's go now plan had already been jotted out with senior Yamaguchi leadership, and Taoka had rung ahead to let them know the time had come to execute it. And so, instructions were issued, transportation was arranged, and associates were called in from all across Kansai. Every man who owed the organization a favor, and more than a few who were eager to earn one, received the call. The Yamaguchi were going to war. Within 2 days, handy blokes of all stripes were pouring into Osaka and coordinating them all with Yukio Jimichi, Taoka's most trusted underboss. Jimichi's reputation was in many ways the inverse of his boss's. He was quiet, softly spoken, a man who simply got things done rather than, having his own crimes immortalized on the silver screen. The nerve center of the operation was a ryokan, which is basically just a small traditional hotel in the Juso district repurposed as a war room. There, under the hum of low lighting and the rustle of maps being unrolled, targets were listed, strategies drawn, and weapons prepared. On the other side, the Meiyu were doing their best to contain the panic and desperately de-escalate the situation. Their boss, Chang Chung-ji, quickly contacted a neutral third party, Suwa Kenji, a senior figure from nearby Nishinomiya, and pleaded for him to mediate. Suwa reached out to the Yamaguchi in good faith, hoping to broker peace before open conflict broke out. Guys, open conflict has already broken out. You're a little late for mediation. This going down. They're in a war room. The reply they got, however, was unwilling, to put it mildly. I was unable to find a transcript or even slithers of what was said, but imagine akimbo middle fingers held up in front of a large and contented grin, and you've pretty much got the idea. From there, Yamaguchi units began striking, and they struck hard. The retaliation began with a wave of coordinated ambushes on Meiyu-affiliated locations across the city, gambling dens, club fronts, backroom offices, even cafes rumored to serve as neutral ground. There were no warnings, no demands, just sudden violence, with gunfire ringing out in alleyways and swords being drawn in car parks. As for specifics, I was able to uncover that on one occasion a pair of Yamaguchi men walked straight into a mahjong parlor in Tennoiji and attacked 2 Meiyu officers in full view of the other patrons. They didn't even bother to cover their faces, they just got the job done and walked back out on the street like it was business as usual. Another Meiyu lieutenant was also dragged out of a cabaret by his tie and pistol-whipped on the pavement until his own men had to carry him away in a taxi, bleeding from the nose and ears. These weren't just random hits either. They were methodical. Each target was chosen not for show, but to weaken the Meiyu's operational network. The message was clear. You picked this fight, and now you're going to lose everything you've built. And that message was being delivered citywide. Did they really pick this fight? You're going to their territory and being like, this is mine now. And they're like, hey, what's your problem? Naturally, the violence soon spilled out of the underworld and into the public consciousness. Newspaper headlines screamed of gun battles in shopping districts and Yakuza soldiers swarming cabarets with clubs and Molotov cocktails. Osaka's ordinary citizens who had been quietly tolerating Yakuza presence in the background for years were now openly terrified. Even the police, who had grown used to a certain rhythm of low-level Yakuza activity, found themselves outpaced. Response teams were overwhelmed, and detectives couldn't keep up with the speed and scale of the retaliation. The numbers outright killed vary dramatically source by source. 3 comes up pretty regularly, but so does 14. The truth of the matter? Who knows? The only thing I know for certain is that however many were killed, they all came from the Meiyu, as the sources are pretty clear that it was an absolute steamrolling by the Yamaguchi. This was all too much for the Meiyu. By trying to play nice, or as nice as Yakuza can anyway, time and time again, they had totally given the momentum to their enemy, and they were now losing ground both literally and figuratively, with absolutely no way to claw it back, and so they threw in the towel on the 21st of August 1960. In a highly ritualized act of submission, Chang Chung-gi, accompanied by 15 of his senior men, presented themselves to Yamaguchi. Each of them had already performed yubitsume, the traditional punishment act of severing one's own pinky finger, and then handed the evidence over in a wooden box. This was diplomacy, Yakuza style. Dude, this would be a crazy movie. This is a crazy story. It doesn't feel real. 2 days later, on the 23rd of August, a formal ceasefire ceremony was held in Mino City, just outside of Osaka. From the Yamaguchi side, Taoka sent Nakagawa and Tanaka, the same two lieutenants who'd been present at the Oshiro brawl, alongside Jiro Yanagawa, a powerful ally with his own brutal reputation. The meeting was mediated by a neutral third-party boss from Kyushu, just to keep things tidy. Smart idea. And with that, Osaka belonged to Taoka. Within 2 weeks, he had walked into one of the most fortified criminal strongholds in Japan and cracked it open like a walnut. His enemies were dead, broken, or bleeding, and those who weren't had personally delivered him their fingers in apology. And the most staggering part? It had cost him almost nothing. No major assets, no lengthy police sieges, no televised manhunts. The entire operation had been swift, decisive, and by Yakuza standards, pretty clean, especially for him. Like, no casualties in the entire takeover of Osaka. But what really made this moment resonate wasn't just the win itself, it was about how it was won. Taoka hadn't bombed the city. He hadn't stirred up an endless turf war. He'd simply mobilized, struck with precision, and left the rest to crumble. He'd made it clear that the Yamaguchi weren't just another syndicate anymore. They were a force, something bigger, something inevitable. Within weeks of the ceasefire, Osaka's underworld shifted. Independent crews started whispering about new allegiances. Smaller gangs who had previously tried to maintain neutrality began drifting into the Yamaguchi orbit, either out of fear or opportunism. You could see it, the way club owners spoke, the way gambling dens quietly changed hands. Even May's former racket started reappearing, now with different signage, a different protection. And for the rest of Japan's criminal ecosystem, this was a warning. A very loud, public warning that the bear of Kobe and the Yamaguchi which he headed had teeth. Taoka's reputation, already formidable, then went up into the stratosphere. Within the space of a single summer, he went from strong Kansai Don to Godfather in waiting. His name carried weight everywhere, not just in Kobe and Osaka, but Tokyo, Fukuoka, Hiroshima, and Nagoya. Even gangs that weren't directly affiliated with Yamaguchi began mimicking his style, reorganizing along corporate lines, tightening command structures, and borrowing bits of his PR charm offensive. He was no longer just a syndicate boss. He was a blueprint. Even law enforcement took notice. Behind the scenes, whispers began circulating through police precincts and public security offices. The Yamaguchi had to be contained. But at the moment, they had nothing to go on. Why? Because while we're looking retroactively and thus know the whole story, they didn't. They had no smoking gun, no trail of bodies they could pin on one man, and while everyone knew who was responsible, proving it in court was another matter entirely. Sure, they could nibble around the edges, bag the old soldier here and there, maybe even nail a lieutenant or two, but they could do nothing to the syndicate itself, nor the man atop it. As one Osaka detective later said, "We knew Taoka was behind it, but he did not fire the shots. His fingerprints weren't on anything. All we had were bruises and dead ends." Yeah, because he's clever. He's sitting on top, and there's no ties, there's no nothing. He's just chilling. Back in Kobe, the man was characteristically unfazed. He didn't issue statements. He didn't crow about his victory. He simply got back to the day-to-day mundaneities of running an organization as vast as the Yamaguchi, as if orchestrating the most impressive expansion in modern Yakuza history had been just another item on the week's agenda. And in many ways, it was. He was just a businessman after all, and because he was a businessman, it wasn't long before his thoughts turned to further expansion. After all, what good suit-and-tie type murderer or otherwise doesn't worship at the altar of the sacred line and its continual going up? Yes, indeed. Up we go. And for Taoka, the next step was obvious. He already had Japan's second city in his clutches, so next he would take its first. Tokyo. The road to Tokyo. The capital was the ultimate prize for any Yakuza. More money, more territory, more prestige, more everything. It was the beating heart of Japan's economy, media, politics, and vice. If you controlled Tokyo, or even carved out a respectable foothold, you weren't just powerful anymore, you were untouchable. Do you think Tokyo's owned by, or run by one gang, or do you think it's so big it's got to be multiple gangs, right? And he's just going to go in and pick them off and consolidate them under Yamaguchi. But here's the problem. Taoka couldn't just take Tokyo, not like he did Komatsushima, and certainly not like he did Osaka, because unlike the smaller cities, where intimidation and muscle usually got the job done, Tokyo was already crawling with giants. The Sumiyoshi, the Inagawa, and the Tosai as examples, they were all well-established, deeply entrenched, and not exactly thrilled about who they still saw as a Kansai upstart rolling in and acting like the city was his for the taking. But it is, because we've heard of Yamaguchi. Like, I started it being like, I'm familiar with that word. I'm not, a weeb? I'm not into Japan, like, over and above other countries or whatever. It's just Japan, okay? But Yamaguchi, I've heard of. These other ones, Shinjuku, Taito, Nakano, never heard of them. I get the feeling Yamaguchi gonna be the big boys by the end of this chapter. And then there was the optics problem. Tokyo wasn't some seedy port town or even just another big city. It was the face of modern Japan. It had politicians, foreign journalists, embassies. You couldn't just blow up a club and expect to hush it up or expect the police to not act because technically they didn't have enough evidence. No. A full-scale turf war in Shinjuku, Taito, or Nakano Ward would trigger a national panic. And, laws and norms be damned, encourage Japan's big hats to on Taoka from such great height that he would think God himself had curled out a fat dump on him. Lovely. This meant his usual strategy, roll deep, hit hard, and wait for the apologies to come in, was off the table. And so he pivoted, and he began building a network, quietly and carefully. This guy's a strategic master. He knows what to do. He's like, can't do that here, gonna try this. It's like some art of war shit. He leveraged his media contacts, of which he had no shortage by this point, to reframe his image in the capital, not as a thug, not even as a Yakuza, but as a respected businessman from Kobe with powerful friends and an interest in stability. He also tapped into the growing post-war nationalism that was still bubbling beneath the surface of polite society. Tokyo, like the rest of Japan, had endured its own share of what many saw as humiliations following Japan's surrender, and Taoka, the self-made, nationalist-leaning anti-drug fire department honor community figure, knew how to play that chord. But the most important move? He made friends. Real ones. Or at least useful ones. Chief among them was Seijo Inagawa, head of the Inagawa Syndicate and the most senior underworld figure in the Kanto region. The groundwork for this alliance had actually been laid years earlier during one of Inagawa's stints in prison. Knowing that an expansion into Tokyo was inevitable because, of course it was, line goes up, Taoka had ordered his men inside to look after him. They made sure he was protected, well-fed, and had a steady supply of Japan's most prized consumable, cigarettes. Now, several years later, that carefully planted seed was about to bloom, because Inagawa had never forgotten the gesture. Taoka went to see him on his own, totally unarmed and bearing a genuine smile. His message? The Yamaguchi want a bit of Tokyo. Should we go splits? Thus, an accord was reached. The Yamaguchi wouldn't put their finger into the Inagawa's cookie dough if the Inagawa kept their finger out of the Yamaguchi's once it was out of the oven. The Sumiyoshi Syndicate, however, they were another matter entirely. They were the capital's traditionalist bruisers, old-school Bakuto, pre-Yakuza gambling types basically, who had banded together into a formal federation back in 1958, mostly out of fear that exactly this situation would happen, not explicitly from Taoka, mind you, but more just a general nascent concern that their old-school way of doing things was under threat. And oh boy is it! But when it did come to Taoka explicitly, they were no fools. They'd seen what had happened to the Honda and Mayu syndicates, and they knew that if the Bear of Kobe started sniffing around both Tokyo and Kanto region more broadly, that they'd have to hold the line, or be crushed. And to be fair, for a while, they did. The Sumiyoshi had numbers and territory, with Shinjuku, Ginza, and Uno districts all being their deeply entrenched stomping grounds. There they ran gambling parlors, controlled the clubs, pimped out women, and enjoyed the sort of home field advantage that only generations of quiet dominance can buy. But what they didn't have, and this would prove fatal, was a friend like Machi. I'm like, wait, who's Machi? But then it says, okay, enter Hisayuki Machi, the Korean-Japanese boss of the Tosai Syndicate. I was like, okay, good. There's lots of Japanese names. It's entirely possible George introduced him like a page ago. I already forgot. But no, here he is. Do you remember a little earlier on? Probably not, George. When I said that this group was among those not too thrilled over the prospect of Taoka rocking up in Tokyo. Well, that was certainly the case for a time. And then the Maichi spotted an opportunity. You see, he also had interests in Ginza, and while he had an uneasy peace with the Sumiyoshi, perhaps through a territory-splitting deal with Taoka, the two power players in Ginza could become one. Taoka agreed, naturally, and Maichi would prove to be a good get for him, because his new friend was a power broker, one who didn't just run the usual rackets, but had connections to everyone. We're talking politicians, the US military garrison, shipping companies, diplomats, the lot. If someone was important, Maichi would do all he was able to do to get their card in his Rolodex. And so, Now that he had both the Inagawa and Tosai on his side, Taoka had effectively isolated the Sumiyoshi and had the full blessing of basically all of Tokyo's underworld players to gobble up their territory for himself, excluding Ginza, of course. This is masterful. Hearing that these deals had been brokered, the Sumiyoshi did make some attempts to call for solidarity. You guys are f***ed, guys. But that went mostly unanswered. Their influence, while considerable, was simply not enough to resist the combined weight of two established Tokyo mobs and a very competent and determined newcomer from down the coast. As a result, they began to fray at the seams. The Yamaguchi started opening businesses on their turf with a sort of do something about it then type of energy, and at the same time, one by one, local smaller protectorate groups began making overtures to the newcomers and business owners who had long paid tribute to the Sumiyoshi, who started hedging their bets and quietly redirecting their payments to the Yamaguchi instead. Smart move, guys. Taoka's reputation alone was all the convincing anyone needed. This is so well done. In 1963, then, the Yamaguchi had a functional presence in Tokyo. Not dominant, mind you, not yet, but embedded, subtle, like a vine creeping up the back of a building. So, what were the Sumiyoshi to do? Were they to kick the can down the street and surrender their advantage like the Meiyu did before them? Or were they to become men of action and grab the bull by the horns? You don't have a choice, you've got to get the bull by the horns. Otherwise, you're just going to get eaten piece by piece. Well, as much as men of action make for cracking characters in these scripts, unfortunately, we aren't getting that now. You see, the timing couldn't have been worse. The Olympics was coming the following year, and Tokyo was also getting ready to cut the ribbon on Japan's first ever Shinkansen line. Oh, this is the high-speed trains. Oh, well, they're from back in the day, 1960s, huh? As a result, the whole world's eyes were currently turning towards the city, and any Yakuza shenanigans would not be tolerated, with the tacit implication being that if any nonsense was pulled, the veneer of the cuddly, fluffy, peace-loving New Japan would temporarily fall, and the powers that be would blow the dust off the old ways and get a bit more Imperial Japan about how they handled it. Yeah, it's always like there are gangs, and they might be powerful and all of that, but then there's the government, who has an army and police and takes like however much percentage of all of the earnings in the country to fund that. Like, the government's always bigger. I mean, maybe not in some like countries where they're getting overthrown by like terror groups and stuff, but like for the most part, government is the big boy. As a result, they did, well, nothing, and never would they either, because deep within one of Tokyo's shiny new post-war glass and steel monoliths, specifically the one used by the Tokyo Police Department, cogs were turning, and ideas were being floated. Okay, here we go, something's going to happen. The 64 crackdown. Remember when I said that the powers that be had said they'd been willing to get a bit Imperial Japan? Indeed I do, George. It was 2 paragraphs ago. My memory might not be brilliant, but 2 paragraphs I can handle. Imperial Japan on the capital's mobsters if any of the coming year's big and shiny activities were disrupted. Well, while I obviously was hyperbolizing a smidge for dramatic effect, the base idea, that being a hard crackdown, was not off the cards if egg were to find itself upon face. And this was very real. So real, in fact, that come 1964, the obvious question was asked, wait, why aren't we just doing this anyway? It's a good question. So, do that they did. And as the Olympic torch arrived, the Japanese authorities unleashed what they dubbed the first anti-Boryakuden campaign. Boryakuden just being the term that vaguely means a particularly violent and overly aggressive Yakuza. This campaign, also called Operation Summit, was effectively an all-out Yakuza extermination drive. Raids, mass arrests, officers shut down, the works. By one account, over 50,000 Yakuza were arrested across Japan from 1964 to 1965, and as they found themselves behind bars, the strength and power of Yakuza syndicates began to shrink fast. From 184,000 Yakuza in 1963 down to about 139,000 by 1969. That's a big reduction, but it's not crazy over like 6 years, like 45,000 Yakuza. The message was clear. Post-war laissez-faire was over, and the new modern Japan would tolerate Yakuza activities no longer. Taoka's Yamaguchi, then likely being the nation's largest syndicate, got special attention as public enemy number 1. The police, usually when speaking off the cuff admittedly, even called their campaign the Yamaguchi Extermination Operation. Accordingly, detectives began to swarm Yamaguchi businesses, both the bent and the legit ones. One of Taoka's crown jewels, the Kobe Harbor Enterprise, a shipping company that provided a ton of legit income, was hit especially hard. Investigators audited and harassed the port operations relentlessly, desperate to find anything and everything that they could use to start taking chunks out of the enterprise. Under this pressure, Taoka had to make a bitter concession, withdrawing the Yamaguchi from the port business entirely. And I mean entirely. The shipping company, even the labor union that he founded way back during his initial expansions, it was all shuttered. Wow, so he's not going to fight. I'm surprised. Exact figures for the damage this did to his cash flow don't appear to exist, but most estimate that this move eliminated as much as half of the Yamaguchi's just their legitimate income. A small price to pay, however, Taoka reasoned, if it gave the filth one less angle of attack. Said filth, for their part, didn't take too kindly to such games, and so they started coming for Taoka personally, cut the head off the snake and all that. And in true Al Capone fashion, he found himself indicted in 1966 on that old, otherwise squeaky mobster chestnut of tax evasion. Now, as a man who 2 days before writing this script had to give His Majesty's Revenue and Customs their annual blood sacrifice, boy, I can't wait for that pothole outside my house, which is old enough to be attending primary school, to still not be fixed. I find it hard to condemn Taoka for this particular crime. Yeah, it is that time of year. Which, make no mistake, he was absolutely guilty of. A murderer who doesn't flinch over fudging some books. Shock horror, I know. But there's no doubting that it's a bloody good avenue to explore when all others prove to be prosecutorial dead ends. Yeah, that's the thing. If they want you for something, it's the f***ing Al Capone. Like, if they can't get you for what they want, they'll just find something else. And they'll just be like, okay, maximum punishment for that. Like, Al Capone went to Alcatraz for tax evasion, right? Or did they end up getting him on something else in the end? I think it was just tax evasion, right? And they were like, all right, off you go. We finally got you for something. And then he got syphilis, or he had syphilis and it rotted his brain. Unfortunately, the police, however, a good avenue can still halt with a dead end, and so Taoka, in a way that none of the books mention, nor did any of the old newspapers they pulled up, shook off the charge and remained a free man. Okay, really? By 1968, however, the lawmen were back with a vengeance as he picked up a charge for having masterminded a so-called extortionate corporate takeover scheme, basically muscling in on a record company via the threat of violence. Then, for good measure, he also caught another indictment in 1969 for extortion and obstruction of business, which, translated from legalese into English, basically meant his protection rackets. He was nothing if not the Teflon Yakuza, to whom nothing would stick. And so he shook off all of these charges for however much Tokyo's best lawyers and a cheeky bribe or two would set a man back in those days. Don't think this meant he was home and dry, however, because while he might have avoided the slammer, the Yamaguchi more broadly, and thus him at the head of it, after many years of breezy sailing, had dropped their paddles and were now adrift, bound for Schitt's Creek. Not only was law enforcement finally making serious moves, collapsing revenues and gutting operations, but his organization was about to turn on him. The crisis of confidence. You see, the Yamaguchi was not only beset by new external pressures, but it was also beginning to rot on the inside too. All of their recent misfortune had many wondering if the Kobe bear's teeth had become dull, and as a result, when he called for solidarity, steadfastness, and action to see the SS Yamaguchi righted, the chorus that shouted out in agreement was a damn sight less enthusiastic than it had been in the past. Case in point, his own underboss, Yukio Ichi. During the height of the crackdown, around 1964 to 1965, Taoka suffered a major heart attack, yet it turns out that even the indestructible bear of Kobe was human and just as capable of a stress-induced physical collapse as the rest of us. The timing of this obviously could not have been worse. At the very time the HMS Yamaguchi needed a captain firmly at the helm, the post was instead unmanned. This terrified some of the lieutenants, who started to panic and began suspecting that while they'd had a good run, the writing was very much on the wall. Yeah, this has got to be kind of scary, right? You're like, the police are cracking down. The one guy who seems to know how to deal with all of this is struggling to deal with it, and now he's gone and had a heart attack. This seems so stressful. Like, this level of stress is just like not what I need in my life. This is why I couldn't be like a criminal. Like, if Breaking Bad, I watched Breaking Bad, I'm like, oh my God, this must be so stressful. Like, this seems so... I just couldn't handle that shit. I'd be like, nah, honestly, prison sounds less stressful than this. Have you guys watched that White Lotus season 3 where there's that one of the like, it's like an ensemble cast, but one of the guys is like a business dude and he's obviously done something really bad and he's so stressed and he's like, that level of stress would just be like, I don't know, I've had points in my life when I'm like mildly stressed, like nothing close to what, these guys experiencing, where it's like, but I don't like it. Just want to have a chill life. No terrible crimes. And none were more scared than Yichi. Don't forget that this was his second in command, a literal killer who had bled and made people bleed for the Yamaguchi without hesitation, without delay, without remorse for years. So if he was scared, the situation was bad. Yeah, dude, you shouldn't be showing this. You're the second in command. You should be like, everything's fine. I'm steering the everything's grand. You can be as terrified as you want when you're at home, but you need to show like a strong face for the troops. This is why he's not in charge. So bad, in fact, that this otherwise stalwart of the syndicate proposed something utterly unthinkable: dissolve the whole organization, split the loot, and call it a day. Maybe he figured they could reform later when the heat had died down, or maybe, and this is the more likely read, had simply lost his bottle and wanted out of the pressure cooker before it boiled over. Bro, I am with you. This sounds like a great point to be like, this, we had a good run, let's take our money and go buy a fucking island. Whatever his true motivations, they ultimately didn't matter, because when news of the plan was brought to Taoka in his hospital bed, having been very much presented to him as a smart, isn't it, type of idea, he was furious, reportedly snarling, leaping from his bed, tearing out his own IV, and making for the door while screaming, "Even if I'm all alone, I'll keep the Yamaguchi going, you," and we'll end the quote there, because the words that followed, the first of which started with an F and rhymed with ducking, and the second of which started with a C and rhymed with punt. Well, hang on. It's going to be in Japanese. Do they have direct translations of that? Fun fact, too, supposedly no amount of beefy orderlies could get him to return to his bed following that, too, with the task instead falling to a very pretty young nurse who low-key had Taoka wrapped around her little finger. The outburst, however, did settle the matter, and at an emergency meeting of the family's senior leadership, called once he was out of hospital, Taoka's loyalists, especially his fiercest lieutenant, Kenichi Yamamoto, swiftly shot down any talk of surrender. This also saw the end of Yichi as a Yamaguchi player, and perhaps unsurprisingly, he was sidelined and retired to the country, being given some tiny, insignificant legal front company to manage to keep him out of the way. Honestly, alright, I'll call it at this point. I would exit this with Yichi. I would want to go and have some small legal front company in the country to manage and just have a chill life, because everyone else is going to get fucked by the police. I'll say it. Although, wait, we know that they become the major gangsters, don't we? Look, either way, I'm retiring to the country. F it, this is way too much pressure and stress. I'm out, Taoka. With the dissent purged and loyalty reaffirmed, Taoka had now coup-proofed his syndicate. Crisis of confidence resolved. From there, to manage things while he continued to recover and avoid any underbosses getting funny ideas again, Taoka set up a collective leadership council. I'm kind of surprised that Yichi just got to go and chill out in the country. We're talking gangsters here, and he didn't coup. He didn't try to do a coup. He was just like, maybe we should dissolve it. That seems like the smart move right now. I guess that doesn't deserve him getting killed. If it was more of a coup attempt, he'd just be like concrete shoes, right? Or whatever they do in Japan. So he set up this collective leadership council, and this saw a group of his top lieutenants, Yamamoto, Masao Sagaya, Kiyoharu Kajiwara, and a few other dependable faces, be tasked with keeping the machine running. It was understood, of course, that Taoka was still the big boss man. That was made very clear, but the council kept factions satisfied and egos in check until he could return to active command. It was a smart move too, as the storm was far from over. You see, by the late 60s, it was clear that the first anti-Yakuza campaign had failed to achieve its ultimate aim, namely putting the Yamaguchis in the ground. Sure, they'd taken losses, and yes, the boys in blue had made things harder, but Taoka had weathered it. Bruised, maybe. It had a heart attack from the stress, but still in the ring. And true to form, when the authorities shut one door, Taoka just found another one to kick open. For example, protection rackets became security services. Wait, I feel like if I was running a protection racket, I'd call it security services. I wouldn't be like, it's a protection racket. You gotta give me money, you're gonna fuck up your shop. Just be like, no, it'd be bad if other people fucked up your shop, wouldn't it? You gotta have security. Loan sharking became financial consulting, and while drugs were still officially banned under Taoka's code, conveniently he softened, and associated groups with no official ties were allowed to pick up the slack. Publicly clean, privately profitable. He was nothing if not pragmatic. But if the business side was getting savvier, Taoka knew the image side needed a facelift too, because after a decade of cops kicking down doors and tabloids printing every salacious rumor they could find, the Yamaguchi name was starting to stink, even in Kobe. And so, Taoka leaned hard into image rehabilitation. Long story short, it was basically a dusting off and a rerun of how he did it the last time, except now with a far broader and more national focus. And it was already extremely impressive the first time. For example, he embraced the label Ninkyo Dantai, which translates as chivalrous organization. Basically, the idea that the Yakuza weren't just criminals, they were modern samurai, protectors of tradition, enforcers of honor, blokes who broke noses, certainly, but only the right noses. And how did he sell the idea to the public? Simple. He leaned all the way into being a community don, and the strangest, and arguably most brilliant example of that, Halloween. Okie dokie, and yes, I do mean that Halloween, the one with the pumpkins, costumes, and sugar combers. It was a holiday barely recognized in Japan at this time, perhaps unsurprisingly, and yet, thanks to one strange evening in Kobe, it would become forever popularized and linked to the Yamaguchi. How bizarre. Halloween's a Christian holiday? I mean, I suppose it's like pagan before that and all of that stuff, but like, right? So I can't imagine it would be a big deal in Japan. Also, fun fact, on Christmas in Japan, they eat Kentucky Fried Chicken. And you have to order it ahead of time because there's such a huge demand for Kentucky Fried Chicken on Christmas Day. I like that. I once did it myself. We were out staying in the country, and we were like, what should we have for Christmas? And it was like, we could cook, we could get a turkey and all this stuff. And I was like, no. We will go to KFC. And we did, and it was awesome. It began, as many weirdly wholesome Yakuza stories do, entirely by accident. In the 1970s, a group of foreign kids, most likely from nearby consulates, were out trick-or-treating in the expat-heavy neighborhood surrounding Yamaguchi HQ. They went door to door in full costume, tiny superheroes and ghosts wobbling about with plastic pumpkins, until, inevitably, one group knocked on the Yamaguchi front door. That's amazing. Why is their headquarters in the, embassy district? Can you imagine the scene? A group of baffled, tattoo-covered gangsters answering the door, staring down at a 6-year-old Dracula holding out a plastic cauldron and screaming, "Trick or treat!" in half-remembered and badly broken Japanese. And how did the Yamaguchi heavies respond? Oh, they're going to be nice. They're just going to give them loads of right? Well, if books are to be believed, it was in a manner that was actually quite cute and endearing. A few back and forth sentences along the lines of, "What the bloody f*** is all this about?" followed by a realization of, oh, it's that weird Halloween thing that foreigners do. And a final realization of, well, we can't just slam the door on them, it'll break their little hearts. From there, Yamaguchi headquarters was pulled apart as those vicious and violent killers went on the hunt for every sweet treat that they could lay their hands on. They got a bit carried away too, want as they were to see the cute little baby children eagerly waiting at their door leave with smiles on their faces, to the point that their sacks were brimmed when they were sent on their way. And you know what that thing kids do when they swap intel on which house gives the best loot on Halloween? Yes, a lot more foreign kids ended up turning up that night. When news of all this reached Taoka, no gasket was blown, however, and instead he was chuffed to bits, A, because it was cute, and B, because through the incident he saw a cracking opportunity for some good PR. And so it was that Halloween became an official yearly Yamaguchi event, where the candy was bought in bulk, soldiers were assigned roles, and the doors to headquarters were thrown open to the local children. This is gangster as shit, dude. This is a fucking movie. This was nothing if not genius. The newspapers covered it, the public smiled, even the police, trying their best not to groan audibly, admitted that it did look good. Now, a tangent here, folks, because regular viewers will know that I'm a for absurdity, and so I had to do some research into this whole Yakuza Halloween business. And you know what I discovered? It turns out that the Yakuza being heavily involved with Japanese Halloween is a thing to this very day. What? Don't believe me? Well, here's an article, and for our audio listeners, its headline reads, "Japan police seek to stop mobsters throwing annual Halloween parties for children." It's dated from 2020. When you frame it like that, it sounds like they're trying to recruit them into the mob or something. But they're not throwing a party, they're just giving them candy from their house. This got me thinking too. I just happened to be in Japan more often than is probably financially sensible, and what would you know, I just happened to be there in October for a visit to Osaka, which, if you remember, is just down the road from Kobe, where the Yamaguchi are headquarters. George, you're going to go there dressed as Dracula. They'll be like, "Aren't you a bit big?" So yes, knowing full well that Yakuza tend to be more don't cause shit and you won't get no shit type criminals, thanks to the two obviously Yakuza types I bumped into at the Yushukan, a military museum cum shrine in central Tokyo, who got me under the wire to have a nose about in their Type 97 Chiha tank. Shout out to Aiko and Haruki, by the way. What the f*** is going on? I think a bit of investigative journalism is in order. Watch this space. Alright then, I'm so confused. Tangent over. Beyond just Halloween, however, Taoka also started to quadruple down on the charismatic altruism around this time, giving money to local schools, funding temples, and the like. He's doing the whole Pablo Escobar thing. It worked too. As by 1970 police pressure had eased, it also didn't hurt that he had managed to go a few years without starting a gang war. But Taoka wasn't naive. He knew the Halloween smiles and honorary medals were only buying him so much time. The law might have eased its grasp a little, but it hadn't forgotten who he was. The public might tolerate a well-dressed Don handing out sweets, but nobody was going to vote him into Parliament, and more pressingly, he was getting old. The stress of the 60s crackdowns had already taken its toll. Remember, this was a man who'd been hospitalized after a heart attack during the heat of it, and by the mid-1970s, he was well into his 60s. He was still sharp, he was still dangerous, but he was no longer bulletproof. No, he'd had a heart attack. His heart's probably a little bit, this was the 60s. I can't imagine they're doing triple bypass open heart surgery and all that stuff. Oh, maybe they are. When did that stuff begin? When was hearts really getting fixed? And unfortunately for him, a few of the younger sharks in the pond had started to smell blood. Blood and bullets in the 70s. This tension came to a head one humid evening in 1978, when Taoka, now 65, silver-haired but still projecting that effortless authority, walked into a nightclub in Kyoto for what was supposed to be a quiet night of drinks. The club, called Bellamy, was swanky, low-lit, and considered safe territory. Taoka had 2 doctors with him, always the sign of a man who knows he's living on borrowed time, plus a small security detail. Nothing out of the ordinary. He just travels around constantly with 2 doctors. He's that's kind of intense. Until it was, because as Taoka sipped his whiskey and no doubt held court in his usual quiet way, a hitman walked up behind him and pulled the trigger. Holy this came out of the blue. What? Wait, but this episode's got several more pages. Is this really the end? A .38 revolver barked once. The bullet tore clean through Taoka's neck, entering at the base and exiting just above the collarbone. Blood sprayed. Patrons screamed. Chairs overturned. 2 of Taoka's companions also caught stray rounds as the assailant emptied their cylinder. One badly, the other just grazed. Taoka himself slumped forward, his shirt blooming red. The bear of Kobe had been shot. Is he going to survive getting shot in the neck at point-blank range by a .38 revolver? Miraculously, somehow, the bullet missed every major artery. It missed his spine. It missed his windpipe. It was a clean through and through, in the literal sense. Within minutes, his men had him in a car and en route to the hospital, and against all odds, he survived. You lucky bastard. Doctors patched him up. The hitman, meanwhile, had vanished, but not for long. His name was Kiyoshi Narumi, and he was a soldier for the Matsuda Syndicate, a rival outfit in Osaka. They'd once been allies of the Yamaguchi, but had since drifted into assumed hostility. I can't believe this guy, who's traveling with 2 doctors and security guards, just gets shot in the back of the neck in a nightclub. It doesn't sound like you need to work on your security, mate. The attempt on Taoka's life, however, would make that assumed hostility very, very real, serving as the flashpoint for what became known as the Third Osaka War. Within hours, all hell had broken loose, with Yamaguchi loyalists answering the Bellamy shooting with a swift and ruthless barrage of payback. In fact, the blood on the nightclub floor hadn't even dried when bullets thudded into a Matsuda boss's house across town in the middle of the night. Ironically, that particular target turned out to have nothing to do with the Bellamy hit, but the Yamaguchi boys cared not. If it was Matsuda, it was now a legitimate target, and weapons-free had been called. Yeah, I don't think they were necessarily going after the assassin, or even who ordered the hit. It's just the organization's buying in. The organization, let's go. Such incidents were but immediate knee-jerk reactions, however, and with time, a more coordinated and better thought-out retaliation scheme would be drawn up. Taoka couldn't do it himself, obviously, as he was still in and out of surgery even days later, and so the burden of jotting this plan down fell to his underboss, Yamamoto. He was a good pick for the job too, because if you remember, he was fiercely loyal as far as underbosses went, and so he took Taoka's shooting, rather personally. Uh-oh. Someone's gonna get killed. Many people are gonna get killed. Maybe someone's gonna get tortured. As a result, over the next few months, Osaka and Kobe were rocked by shootings, ambushes, and even the occasional bombing as the full force of the Yamaguchi, themselves by now easily the largest Yakuza syndicate in Japan, and basically any other group that they were even slightly on pally terms with, were unleashed to hunt the Matsuda down like dogs. I think I have a pair of glasses made by a company called Matsuda. I'm just trying to think, is that the name of the brand? It's a big glasses brand from Japan. It's not these, but I do have a pair. I'm pretty sure it's Matsuda. Okay. In one brazen hit at a public bathhouse, Yamaguchi shooters stormed in and gunned down a Matsuda lieutenant mid-scrub. On other days, it was car-to-car ambushes in busy city traffic or drive-by shootings on the crowded streets of downtown Osaka, sending shopkeepers and bystanders scrambling for cover. There were even reports of Molotov cocktails and pipe bombs lobbed at enemy officers in the dead of night. It seemed no place and no time of day was safe. Morning, noon, or night, the Yamaguchi were out for blood. I have to say what I like about this episode. There's a distinct lack of torture. Like, often you do things with gangs and it's like, someone's getting tortured pretty badly at some point. And in this one, not at all, which is quite a relief because I find torture, uncomfortable. Well done, Simon. Big brain statement there. I find torture uncomfortable. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering why Narumi had bothered to pull the trigger. After all, killing the boss of Japan's largest Yakuza, not exactly a small deal, is it? So he must have had a damn good reason. And to be fair, he did, thanks to the so-called Nipponbashi incident, which was when the former boss of the Matsuda took 3 .38 special rounds in the titular district in Osaka while climbing into his car and was killed on the spot. I mean, yeah, the head of the Yakuza, the largest Yakuza group in Japan. There's many reasons many people would want to kill him. The gunman was a Yamaguchi man, of course, and the reason he was killed, simple. The Matsuda were one of those very rare smaller syndicates that refused to bend to the knee of the Yamaguchi, and like it done so many times before, Taoka reasoned that violence was the most expedient method of seeing those knees bent. And it worked too, save for one knee in particular, Narumi's, and thus the two were now at all-out war. Something different happened this time, however. You know, in the previous Yamaguchi wars, when the police would show some initial enthusiasm before burning out and civilians would largely keep their heads down and their mouths shut? Well, that didn't exactly happen this time. Osaka residents, for their part, were thoroughly fed up with having to look over their shoulders on the morning commute in case two gangsters decided to have a shootout at the traffic lights. Neighborhood safety meetings were held, PTA mums marched on police HQ demanding action, and staged protests against the Yakuza violence, which had become the new norm, with one apparently surprisingly large one even taking place right outside of the Yamaguchi's headquarters. The police, meanwhile, were not about anymore. The National Police Agency in Tokyo was scrambled to bolster the Osaka Prefectural Police's numbers, and officers who were not trained for using heavy hardware quickly had that skill gap plugged as containers full of body armor, steel helmets, and Type 64 battle rifles began being shipped in from the JSDF, Japan's military. It is getting real. From there, checkpoints were set up on the highways between Osaka and Kobe to intercept gun-toting gangsters, and the top brass publicly vowed to crack down on the Yakuza, raiding gambling dens and weapon stashes in a show of force. In sweep after sweep, then, hundreds of Yakuza were rounded up and duly sent to the slammer on any and every charge that could be pinned to them. And where was Taoka, the man at the center of the storm, during all of this? Well, he was laid up in hospital, sporting an oxygen mask and a nasty bullet wound to the neck. For the moment, the shooting had threatened to throw the mighty Yamaguchi into chaos. A boss at death's door is a big liability in the underworld after all. Rivals could smell weakness, and internal factions might start circling like sharks. But Taoka was nothing if not steely, and so he took the reins back from Yamamoto as soon as he was able, while still in the hospital in fact, still managing to growl out orders via his wife and lieutenants to keep the Yamaguchi unified and focused. I was wondering this whole time, is he married? Does he have kids? What's his situation at home? I feel like it's not been mentioned at all so far. So how did the Third Osaka War end then? Well, despite all the newly strengthened external pressures, in a nutshell, the Yamaguchi got what they wanted, and won. Narumi's bullet-ridden corpse turned up in the remote wood of Mount Rocco near Kobe. Surprise! When police found him on the 17th of September, his body showed clear signs of a savage beating before execution. Well, there's some of the torture. The case officially went unsolved, unsurprisingly no witnesses, and quietly expired with a statute of limitations in 1993. But everyone and their grandmother knew that this was Yamaguchi's bloody fingerprint. Therefore, with Narumi eliminated and the Matsuda faction effectively neutered, the victory went to the Yamaguchi. As for the full nitty-gritty X happened then why happens of how it ended, it was a bit of a break from Yakuza norms. You see, Taoka wasn't exactly what you'd call overflowing with a sense of Christian forgiveness. I can't say I blame him. If I was as powerful as him and had taken a bullet, I'd probably be throwing the mother of all angry crash outs and going through the Rolodex and seeing if any of those American tanks down in Okinawa couldn't just happen to fall off the back of a lorry. As a result, there was no traditional reconciliation meeting with Matsuda. That, if you're curious, totally is a thing that normally happens, as when a Yakuza war ends, typically there's an elaborate apology dinner. That's amazing of sorts. Or at least a very proper bow or five between the formerly opposed bosses to save face on both sides, and of course, a few fingers are usually delivered at the same time to leave no doubts who the real winner was. I guess that makes sense. It's a lot better than just, an endless bloodbath. This time, however, the Matsuda were cut out of the equation altogether to slight them, and on the 1st of November 1979, Yamato invited the press to Taoka's personal mansion and simply announced the end of the war, with the big man himself watching on the sidelines. And just like that, after roughly 3.5 months of carnage, the Third Osaka War ended not with a bang, but with a press conference. The press ate it up, of course. Photographers snapped pictures of Yamamoto looking victorious and confident on the steps of Taoka's home, and the papers sent them immediately to print the next day, alongside headlines like, "Yakuza War Ceasefire Declared." It's incredible how it's so formal. It's almost like countries declaring peace, and they have like the peace accords rather than a press conference. Although I suppose they would have a press conference these days after the peace accords, right? Let's move on. Succession and the beer's final days. Really? Got a good chunk of script left, George. His near brush with death also got Taoka pondering over something he'd never really given much thought to, despite having hit the right old age of 66, his mortality, because what would have become of the Yamaguchi if he had died? It was a question to which he feared the answer might be grim. That just like the Toyotomi Hideyoshi's and Minamoto no Yorimoto's of Japan's past, the very historical strongmen Taoka liked to imagine himself the modern incarnation of, his death would spark a succession crisis that could tear apart everything he had built. You've always got to plan for succession. Always. Fortunately, however, the next question, i.e. who, wasn't one he had to think over for long, because as far as he was concerned, there was only one man fit for the job: Yamamoto, his battle-hardened and loyal to the grave lieutenant who never let him down once, never once failed him, and had in fact already proven himself a competent leader when he briefly took control of the Yamaguchi's reins while Taoka was in hospital. I get the feeling there's a but coming, George. It's going to be like, however, he absolutely betrayed him, or something like that. Or he rolled over what's it called? Where you testify on behalf of the state, turn state's evidence or something like that. Just from the movies. One problem with that, however, there we go. Yamamoto was no spring chicken himself, then being 53 years old, and what's worse, thanks to being something of a top boozer, frankly I'd be amazed if it touched a glass of water since the invasion of China, given how books describe him, it was thought that he would die not long after Taoka, if he even made it that long. Enter Masahisa Takanaka, Plan B. He was younger and up-and-coming lieutenant in the Yamaguchi, bright, ambitious, and notably more business-minded than some of the old guard. And of course, while his contributions to the story haven't quite been significant enough to get him a mention up until now. Yep, I was trying to remember him, and I don't remember him. Also, I recorded half of this script yesterday, because it's really, really long. Oh no, honestly, chances of you listening to this all in one block? I'd say pretty low. Like, I rarely listen to a podcast this long in one go, unless I'm on an extremely long drive somewhere. But he was noted for being absolutely blind and unwavering in his loyalty. With him kind of being the real, or at least eventual successor then, Taoka started grooming him for the role, elevating him to deputy underboss, third in command basically, and giving him ever more authority and responsibility. This seems like a great idea. This dude has an absolute well-screwed-on business head. Oh, and of course it didn't hurt that Fumiko, Taoka's wife, took a bit of a shine to him, and no, not in that way, in a very wholesome, sort of like the son I never had sort of way. Turns out that Taoka didn't exactly have as long as he might have hoped to make his arrangements, as on the 23rd of July 1981, at the age of 68, he was dead. That's pretty young to be dead. I mean, obviously 68's quite old, but, like, to be dead, that's unfortunate. And don't Japanese people live quite long? Don't Japanese have one of the longest life expectancies in the world? And his end didn't come from the blade or the bullet of a rival Yakuza, as you might expect, but from a heart attack. If nothing else, it's an end that makes sense. He did lead a rather stressful life, after all. That also means that, unlike the stereotypically satisfying Hollywood ending, the one where the mafioso protagonist invariably has to deal with a spectacular fall from grace that sees them lose it all before being put in the ground, Taoka got away with it all. The murders, the racketeering, the extortion, the bombings, the whole damn lot. Yep, he just happily living in a mansion, I'm sure having a good-ass time. And yeah, then he dies. And right in that got me thinking. If he didn't get away with it, what kind of sentence would he be looking at? Ooh, interesting hypothetical. I'm not exactly sure this is a hypothetical I can answer, though, as I'm not a lawyer and certainly not a Japanese lawyer. Because I had my heart set on giving you a big juicy number, however. Oh, please tell me that you put this into ChatGPT. I know ChatGPT will often just make up some answer, but it is awesome at answering hypotheticals. I had a great one the other day. I was like, write a realistic news piece in the style of the BBC about us discovering alien life on some distant planet, and write that. And it was so good. It read just like a BBC article. It was like, this is an important day for humanity, but we have no way of communicating with them. They don't know we exist. Scientists say this, scientists say that, but we know there's alien life. And I was like, it almost sent shivers down my spine at how realistic it was and how important it would be to read something like that if it was real. All right, but let's see a random ChatGPT tangent. Let's see what George actually does. I wanted that big juicy number so we could collectively point at it in unison and say, ooh, imagine. So I blew the dust off ChatGPT, yes. Fed it the script up until this point, and asked it to have a guesstimate. And it reckoned 231 years if he managed to dodge the death penalty. And in 1980s Japan, I suspect there was a slimmer chance of that happening than the next pope adding a big fat bifters as an element of the Eucharist. What is a bifter? Big fat bifters as an element of the Eucharist. I know what the Eucharist is. It's like that thing where you have the blood and the flesh of, which is wine and bread. Bifter. I'm going to guess that it's a spliff, right? All right. I try not to look things up and delay these episodes, but I have to know. Bifter. Meaning? Oh, a cigarette. Oh, a marijuana or cannabis cigarette. That'd be pretty dope, to be honest. As for the matter of his funeral, well, it was nothing short of epic. They held a massive Buddhist ceremony in Kobe that felt less like mourning and more like a state funeral for the underworld's emperor. An estimated 1,300 Yakuza from over 200 gangs came to pay their respects, lining the streets in somber black suits, silent and orderly like a private army. Outside, 800 riot police stood guard just in case. Epic, dude. The public, meanwhile, watched with a mixture of awe and unease. It's not every day you see Japan's most notorious gangsters assembling en masse, effectively holding their own parade. This was the final salute to the Japanese Godfather, and it was grand, chilling, and historic all at once. In his final years, thoughts about succession proved to be most wise, as on the 4th of February, 1981, Yamamoto's boozing caught up with him and he too passed away, having been denied the opportunity to serve as either a provisional or a true leader of the Yamaguchi, thanks to his being in prison during his final months. Well, it's part of the business, isn't it? Knowing that, you'd likely assume that the reins went straight to Takanaka, but actually they didn't, at least not immediately. You see, following Yamamoto's death, it was actually Fumiko, Taoka's wife, if you recall, who ended up taking command. Sadly, however, she didn't do it in a step aside, boys, it's time for a woman to show you how it's done, the sisters are doing it themselves now kind of way, and I do mean sadly, as that would have made for an incredible story, but instead it was more in a regent kind of way, with most of the Yamaguchi lieutenants agreeing that Takanaka needed just a smudge more grooming and experience before he was ready to take on the crushing responsibility of running Japan's largest Yakuza syndicate. Yeah, it's quite a big boy job, isn't it? How old was he at this point? Was that mentioned? Quite young, I suppose. Certainly this was a sensible move, because who else would understand Taoka's dying wants better than a woman who had been wed to him for 37 years, with the pair actually having gotten married all the way back in 1944. But the fact it was a sensible move did not stop it from being a really, really big deal. Then, just as now, to be fair, women didn't even join a Yakuza as full-made members, never mind lead them. By all accounts, Fumiko Taoka was no mere figurehead either. She had a spine of steel, and while she knew full well her role was a temporary one, something she was grateful for, to be honest, it was still very much business as usual at the Yamaguchi during her tenure. Oh, it's a little something I discovered while researching this segment. It turns out that there actually has been one proper female Yakuza, and for the viewers, here she is! Nichimura Meiko. I recommend Simon flick open Safari. Dude, you've given me a link that is just printed out, and it's insane. It's like 4 lines long. I can't, it's not working, George. I can't click on a script. Because say what you like about the whole being a criminal business, let's be real, she looks sick, doesn't she? Oh, I want to know what she looks like. I guess I'll look it up after this episode. And now that Simon has the script back in hands, folks, George, you've underestimated how lazy I am. Let me ask him about this in front of you. I'm going to assume that you can consider an episode on her greenlit because me, that can only be a banger, right? She's still knocking about too. Not be rude not to track it down and arrange a popping over for a little chat. Let me see. Let's see how this episode does first. I also think that we'll wrap today's story up because what is going on? There's like many pages left. Let's see. Because since we're focusing solely on Taoka today, we're getting dangerously close to big topics that really should be covered on their own episode. Okay, wow. I guess why this isn't turned into a movie yet is because it's like, and he gets away with it all. It's kind of like a good ending for him, but that's it. And then his gang is still around today, like being the biggest Yakuzas in Japan, right? The Yamaguchi. Holy Conclusion. What of Taoka's legacy then? What ultimately was his impact? And how should we consider this man? On one hand, he was the visionary godfather of godfathers who dragged the Japanese underworld into the modern age, taking a ragtag band of dock workers and hoodlums and turning it into the world's largest criminal syndicate, well over 10,000 strong at its peak. He also pioneered a new style of Yakuza leadership, part organized crime CEO, part feudal lord of industry. He forged alliances, courted celebrities, and even befriended politicians, all to elevate the Yamaguchi's influence. And as a result, in the 70s, it had its tentacles in everything from real estate and construction to sports and showbiz. By some accounts, it was a multi-billion-dollar empire that touched 36 of Japan's 47 prefectures. Taoka himself became something of a celebrity gangster, one with a carefully pruned and nurtured image as a chivalrous outlaw, attending charity events, schmoozing with legitimate businessmen, all while quietly ensuring that anyone who crossed him wound up with a price on their head. Keyword there, though, gangster. Despite all the absurdity of his story, the suits, the money, the Halloween candy, the honorary rides in fire trucks, Taoka remained what he had always been at heart, a criminal, a man who ruled by fear when it was needed, who muscled out rivals with bullets and blades when charm failed, and frankly, given how ruthlessly pragmatic he was, had he been born 50 years prior, I don't doubt his rule would have been far more violent. All he was a smart enough man to recognize that such methods had become inefficient at best and proactively detrimental at worst. Still though, his antics did buy me a bit of elbow room on having to research another soul-crushing macabre case, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't just a smidge grateful for that. Dismembered appendices. Well, I certainly wasn't lacking in sources for this one, folks. As to say Taoka has received quite a bit of attention over the years would be quite the understatement. For example, while I was source hoovering on my last visit to Japan, I managed to snag a few mega tomes that broke down his life in such depth that they made today's episode look like a footnote in comparison. One book I picked up stands head and shoulders above the rest, and it would be this bad boy. I assume video viewers are seeing an image on the screen. I assume it's a picture of a large book, which cost me a mere £2 in Sapporo. I don't know what Sapporo is. Why is it so good, you ask? Well, that would be due to the fact that while my other books were biographies, this one is an autobiography. Yes, the mad lad, in stark contrast to this show's well-established rules, actually wrote down his own crimes. So yeah, that was handy. He wrote them down and he got away with it all. Oh no, he's breaking the cardinal rule! Unfortunately, it covered only the early part of his life, up to his ascension to the top of the Yamaguchi, basically, but still, how's that for a good source? From there, anything he didn't mention himself I took from biographies, threw in some extra details I pulled from online newspaper articles, and bosh, happy days, research done. This also means that, just like we did with my Kyoto Animation Massacre script, we owe Yukino our thanks and a big round of applause. For those of you who missed that one, oh my god, I don't remember. She's my Japanese tutor, and also now my cultural consultant come translator for when my Japanese falls shorts, which, given that I've only been learning for a year and a bit now, it does more often than I'd care to admit. How much does this cost me, you ask? Well, that's between her and His Majesty. Oh, yeah, it's His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. That's so weird. It's still HMRC, though. That's like our tax man in the UK. Because as a blessed relief to my bank account, her labour is tax deductible. And that is the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you. And I'll see you in the next one, won't I?